Good evening. It is March 23rd, 2021. I will call this Board of Education meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. Thank you for joining us. The meeting tonight is being conducted both in person and electronically. Board members and some staff are meeting in person, while members of the public and other staff are watching the meeting remotely. Community comments will take place in person for those who registered to make remarks this evening. Okay, with that, I'll look for approval of the agenda. Board members like to make any changes to the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed. Brings us to community comments, and just so board members know, looks like we have up to 10 people signed up to comment. So far, I think we have 8 in attendance. So let me read this. This opportunity for public comment is for members of the community who registered to speak by the designated deadline. I call up each speaker one at a time, and I will give everyone 3 minutes for their remarks this evening. Anyone who exceeds the time limit or makes personal attacks, use profanity, or identifies any student by name may be asked to immediately end their remarks. With that, Tessa will call the first person, and I have I'm going to say Silent Wellington to speak to us first. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Silent Wellington. That's silent as in silent without a T, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am here representing myself, and I also serve as the Lgbtq outreach coordinator for the Alliance for Suicide Prevention of Larimer County, and I'm a volunteer for Splash NoCo Youth. I would like to express my gratitude tonight for your Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Plan and your resolution to recognize Transgender Day of Visibility. I grew up here in Fort Collins and attended Poudre School District schools for 12 years. When I was growing up, I did not know that non-binary and transgender people existed. All I knew was that I didn't feel like I fit in and that there wasn't a place for me in the world because I couldn't see myself reflected back in it. As a result, I lived most of my adolescence with persistent thoughts and plans of suicide. Thankfully, I survived this time in no small part because of having supportive friends and family, which is not something every LGBTQ+ young person has. Curriculum materials that affirm our many identities and represent multiple complex human experiences and perspectives, like your EDI plan proposes, would have really benefited me. As LGBTQ people, especially when we are growing up, we need to see representations of ourselves thriving, making history, and living long, joyful lives. Your EDI plan could help so many youth in our community feel like they belong and that their futures are possible. As a volunteer for Splash Youth, I see firsthand how inclusive schools can make a life-saving difference for a young person. From the Trevor Project's 2020 national survey, we know that 22% of LGBTQ youth who experienced discrimination attempted suicide in 2019, compared to 8% who did not. LGBTQ students who didn't feel supported at school were nearly twice as likely to attempt suicide than those students who felt their schools were supportive. At the Alliance for Suicide Prevention, we recognize the importance of anti-discrimination policies that are inclusive of gender, gender identity, gender expression, and sexual and romantic orientation. And we support PSD's EDI plan to bring more inclusive curriculum and support for marginalized students and staff in our schools. Your EDI plan is not a sexual agenda, as some community members at these board meetings have characterized it to be. It is a lifeline for students who haven't been able to tell their stories, who may feel scared going to school, and who need to see that our community values and respects them. Your EDI plan is suicide prevention, and on behalf of my younger self and the LGBTQ+ youth that I serve, I thank you for doing this life-saving work, and I look forward to building a more inclusive community with all of you. Thank you. And I brought flags as a gift.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, and next up this evening will be Ms. Kimberly Chambers. Welcome.
Hey there, my name is Kimberly Chambers. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the parent to PSD's graduates, a current sophomore. I'm also the executive director for Splash LGBTQA Youth of Northern Colorado, the only local youth organization serving our kids in NoCo. Thank you for the moment to share my experience as an ally and an advocate for the students of Poudre School District, who are transgender, non-binary, gender fluid, and gender non-conforming. I've spent nearly every single day of this past year communicating with many PSD students who fall under the same transgender umbrella as I mentioned. As they coped or they didn't cope with what COVID threw at them. I've spent much of the last 6 years supporting these students, but never before this pandemic was it every single day. It hit my radar that many of our transgender students felt quite a sense of relief when online learning was the necessary option. Many appreciated the fact that the pressure they faced at school every day were on pause and they could feel more comfortable in their authentic selves while at home, even when they weren't out to their parents. This verified for me that there was still work to do with our young gender expansive generations, ranging from second grade to seniors in high school. The resolution that this Board of Education will make tonight will be the utmost importance to the students who are not counted and the students who will eventually need to return to in-person learning next year. It will speak to our queer and trans students and staff members who easily make up 10% of our classrooms, that they are seen and have permission to be visible in their own learning spaces. The way that this Board of Education has handled recent transphobia is commendable and deserves acknowledgement. Our trans youth are exhausted from defending themselves, and having this governing body create equity and inclusion policies and resolutions that name them specifically tells them that they indeed deserve the same safe place, the same public education as their cisgender peers. Thank you for resolving that the visibility of our trans students, staff, and educators is what makes our district great. And thank you for the continued work of the board, the diversity department, and the EDI committee of community members to ensure that every student has access to learn. Splash would like to present this progressive pride flag to the board in honor of you resolving that our kids honestly really matter in our classrooms. So I'll leave that here. But thank you for your time and thank you for your work.
Thank you for your comments and for the flag. Much appreciated. You never use swag. So. Individual. Okay, and next up will be Danny Lawrence. You're ready. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Danny Lawrence. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate your time and service to our community. In consideration of tonight's discussion about equity, diversity, and inclusion as a parent of a special needs student, I again wanted to reiterate that denying parents the ability to openly participate in the Special Education Advisory Committee doesn't align with the district's goals about inclusion. On the district's website, there's a list of PSD promises, including inclusive leadership and creating a climate and culture that includes family and community. How can the district say that they're committed to those promises while observing over email and the complete gaslighting of my very legitimate concerns about not being able to speak to the committee that gives recommendations to you all about special education? Furthermore, on the district's website, there's indication of the commitment to the principles of community included in the ideas of inclusion, equitable access, and a welcoming environment. Based on what you've read and what I keep saying, do you think I feel welcomed? Silencing as a general rule doesn't give somebody warm and fuzzies. It certainly doesn't give me, a parent stakeholder, equitable access. I guess equitable access only applies to the 10 parents that get the opportunity to serve on that committee, picked by the district's integrated services staff. Even by our own printed materials for this school district, all voices are supposed to be included while we're silencing the parents of vulnerable students. So is the EDI just a nice sentiment, or are those just idealistic words, or does the district actually plan on implementing the philosophies that would make this a welcoming culture of inclusion and equitable access, because if that's the case, I know a great place for you guys to start. Finally, for several weeks I've been making comments here behind speakers who are bashing LGBTQ students' rights. I wish in your EDI discussions I was seeing the intolerance of the hate speech that's displayed here twice a month by people who don't have children in the school district. There are a lot of children here to protect with the equity, diversity, and inclusion proposals. My gay student and visually impaired son are two of them, and I hope each of you is taking that seriously, because I know I am, and we have a lot of great kids who deserve a safe place to go to school. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, next up will be Ms. Kate Green. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Kate Green and I'm a 15-year-old freshman at Rocky. My favorite color is also coincidentally green. I'm here today to speak on the EDI, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion proposal, not only as a student but as a member of the LGBTQ community. I've been watching the past two board meetings and felt the need to speak today, especially as it is an agenda item. The idea that this proposal is being discussed specifically for the LGBTQ inclusion by the public comments section is frustrating. At the end of the day, this type of education isn't only needed for students but also for teachers. I recently moved here from Arizona, but I can compare two different schooling experiences. From kindergarten up until the end of 7th grade, I attended public school. Policies like this one were not in place, so to speak, but the teachers were still where LGBTQ students attended the class. I can remember two incidences in a history class and one in a sex ed class where LGBTQ rights were debated by my peers, brought up by my teachers. I believe that if my teachers had known I was gay and were properly educated, this might not have been a discussion, as it definitely should not have been. From 8th grade year through the winter break of my 9th, I went to a charter school that focused on the arts. Their staff went through extensive training on inclusion, and LGBTQ issues included. This environment was one that I could flourish in. I was not only included, but happy there, and I have many LGBTQ friends who feel similarly. I moved here with the intent of being exposed to a better environment, one that I could be more included in and one where I could flourish again, and I do hope that I was not wrong. The fact that I need to stand here today and defend the proposal is proof that it needs to be implemented. Not only do I, but other students deserve to be able to get an education in a manner in which we are included. While you and those are discussing this issue go to work tomorrow, I will be at school. I mean that as politely as possible, but I feel like this proposal is reactionary and not proactive. I feel like it should have been implemented 5, if not 12 years ago. I feel that we are behind and behind by a lot. And again, I remind you, I'm going to be at school tomorrow. I genuinely hope you all have a good rest of your evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, and next up will be Ms. Shirley, and I'm going to say Loan. And I hope I get it correct. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Shirley Long, and I'm a member of the School Justice PSD campaign, and I'll be speaking tonight on behalf of someone who couldn't be here. My name is Blaine, and I'm a recent graduate of Poudre High School. I spent all of my school years in the Poudre School District system. I would love to be here in person, but my compromised immune system means I can't go out in public yet. However, I am having this letter read on my behalf because I know you will be voting on retaining SROs in our schools, and as a trans student, this issue is important to me. During my time at Poudre, I only had one interaction with the SRO when I was a leader of our school's GSA, or Gender and Sexuality Alliance. Another leader of the GSA and I went to our school's SRO to request his help with some online bullying that was occurring against our club. Walking into his office, there was an unspoken fear between us. Even though neither of us were consciously thinking it, there was an understanding of the very recent history of hostility towards queer people from the police. Those sentiments don't go away quickly and are constantly reflected in the way police often fail to do anything about hate crimes perpetuated against the LGBTQ community. These fears were only amplified by the Blue Lives Matter flag hanging on the wall over his desk.
Seeing that so prominently placed there, a flag heralded in direct opposition to the Black Lives Matter movement made me realize I may not be safe in that office. I wondered if he feels comfortable enough sending that message to one marginalized community, what other beliefs might he hold against other such communities? To those of us fighting to be seen, to have our identity validated and humanized, this flag is a symbol of all the ways that people seem to think that giving Black and trans folks that recognition somehow takes away from who they are. The police have power already. They are seen as an identity and as a valid people. So as someone who has been told my identity is not real over and over again, that flag is nothing more than a symbol of their power over me and how it is used to oppress queer and trans people. Our meeting with the SRO was short. He couldn't or wouldn't do anything to help us, claiming that unless a crime has been committed, he couldn't do anything. This made it clear to me that the SROs are not there to prevent us from being harmed. They are only there to do something once we have already been harmed. We never asked him for help again, even when our posters were torn down time after time and slurs were shouted at us in the halls. I'm not sure what SROs do to help students, but for students like me, they do not seem to do anything but make us feel less safe in our own schools. And data also tells us that students who are not white, not middle class, not cisgender, etc. are the ones who get referred to them for discipline for behavior issues. Rather than address equity like you should be doing, the SROs only enforce white, cis, heteronormative, and class privilege. Just like the Blue Lives Matter flag, boldly displayed, SROs are a symbol of oppression and control. I ask you to consider how your values are symbolized through the choices you make on behalf of all of your students, and most particularly those of us who already endure hate and invalidation just because of who we are. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, and next we'll have Ms. Reina Trujillo joining us. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Renee Trujillo. I'm standing here as a community member and a representative of School Justice, Cougar School District. I first want to start by expressing my gratitude for the opportunity to speak during this meeting. I hope that you all have been able to contact and check in with your loved ones and community members who have connection to the Boulder community. Also, just want to take a moment to acknowledge every person who fell victim to this heinous crime, including the officer and 9 innocent people who lost their lives. On March 4th, 2021, you all received a letter with multiple testimonies from students of color who experienced bias, fear, and discomfort because of an SRO in their high school. You just heard a testimony from another student who experienced the same. You have no way to control this type of behavior by an SRO. You have no way to collect information like this from students to document it or to act upon it. The reaction so far to the student testimonies has been to doubt them and discredit them because they were not raised at the time they happened, despite the fact that there is no system for raising such complaints, or to state that an individual officer can and will change their behavior. It doesn't matter how much training a police officer has or what kind of reporting systems you have in place. You will never be able to prevent officers from engaging in behavior that demonstrates their bias against students of color, LGBTQ students, and other vulnerable populations. It is true that many persons in the school system may have biases, but they don't all have guns or the ability to place a student in the juvenile justice system, which we know can have detrimental long-term effects that ripple out into the entire community. We call on Cougar School Board for the following information and actions. would like to know why this officer continues to have contact with students. The district must immediately implement a confidential reporting system for students, parents, and staff to report racial bias and SRO misconduct. This system must be operated by an objective third party and must be transparent to the entire community. While this action will serve to document abuses, such abuses are inherent in the SRO program. The only way to prevent these abuses from happening and to protect our students from such harm is to discontinue the SRO program. Thank you so much for your time and for this opportunity.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Okay, and next up, I'm going to pronounce this as best I can, Ricardo Jacques, I believe. Welcome.
Hello. My name is Ricardo Jacques, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here this evening. As a community member and a young person concerned about the future for our Black, Brown, immigrant, and LGBTQ students, I would like to make a simple but pertinent statement. It is critical that we listen to those in our community who are calling out injustice and systems of harm, and this evening I am specifically speaking of the presence of police in schools. You, as the elected board members, hold the decision-making power and responsibility to serve all the students, including, most specifically, those of color, LGBTQ, and students with disabilities that are calling out unsafe learning environments. If we consider the history of police in our country, the root causes of conflict and disruptive behavior in schools is something that the police are clearly not capable of addressing. The figures on arrests and referrals to law enforcement show disproportionate targeting of Black, Latinx, and Native American students. This is just one aspect of the school-to-prison pipeline where some students are denied an opportunity to succeed and instead are pushed out of school and into the juvenile or criminal justice system. While complete emotional and financial and social impact of daily police presence in school is not fully understood, it is clear that students and their families are criminalized. And the school-based arrests and referrals to law enforcement go up when police have a regular presence in schools. We all want to ensure a safe, welcoming learning environment, and the good news is there are many exciting, viable possibilities when it comes to alternatives to police in schools. Like staff trained to ensure safe and positive school climates, community intervention workers, peace builders, transformative or restorative justice coordinators, school aides, or even counselors and other support staff. Most importantly, it is our role as those not directly impacted to listen with curiosity and love and follow through with concrete actions. It is not enough to have good intentions. We must be accountable to those who explain and share their lived experiences with SROs and the feelings of being unsafe or unwelcomed. I envision a public school system that values students, parents, communities, and as decision makers with a fundamental human right to shape their education. In this education system, schools are safe, healthy, and nurturing environments where every student has the possibility and opportunity to reach their full potential. Please vote to remove SROs from our schools. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Okay, and the last person I have on the list is Miss Alexandria Bish.
Cool. Hi, yeah, thank you for the chance to speak today. My name is Alexandria Bish, and I'm coming to the board as a concerned Fort Collins community member. Today, I'm calling on the board to remove SROs from PSD and to instead fund student safety and well-being in other and more beneficial ways. I did want to start off with commending you on the recent update of the district's equity, diversity, and inclusion statements, and on the steps that you have begun to take in this direction. On the district's equity, diversity, and inclusion webpage, you do specifically state that you will, quote, develop and expect an inclusive climate and culture based on trusting relationships between students, schools, families, and community. And you also state that to do this, you will, quote, ensure school-wide positive behavior models and non-discriminatory, non-exclusionary discipline practices. I point out these two particular statements because they are inherently contradictory to the presence of an SRO program within PSD schools. As students and PSD community members have shared with you, SROs do not create climates and cultures of inclusivity and trust. In fact, the West Contra Costa Unified School District in California ended its contract with police and redistributed $1.5 million to efforts to support African American student achievement in order to, quote, move their district away from using the punitive presence of law enforcement to a more supportive and restorative model that protects students from the threat of surveillance and police violence in their schools, according to their board president. Additionally, the Oakland Unified Schools safety plans actually include eliminating their Oakland PD, or Oakland Unified PD, because their analysis showed that an armed officer was rarely necessary and could be replaced by another trained professional. If PSD eliminates SROs in this way and instead funds mental health and restorative resources for students, this would decrease discriminatory discipline practices and also provide resources to students who aren't even receiving any support right now. Finally, SROs and PSD do not ensure non-discriminatory, non-exclusionary discipline practices because your data does show that students of color and students of difference are disproportionately disciplined. This harms students of color and students of difference, and it also harms students in the majority who may actually need disciplinary boundaries and support services but aren't receiving them. Ultimately, the board has the responsibility to ensure the district is fulfilling their DEI commitments to the PSD community. And so I think that the most important and biggest step that you can take to do this is to remove SROs from PSD and to instead fund student support in more positive, comprehensive, and transformative ways. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, Tessa, did anybody else show up? Okay, so that does conclude community comments for the evening. All right, with that, I will bring us to item 4.0, that's board topics and committee reports. And as I did for our last meeting, I'll launch this with just a brief update on the superintendent search process, which is moving along quickly. Since our last meeting, the job posting was closed. That was on March 15th, and PSD received quite a pool of candidates, so that was very exciting. HYA, the search firm that PSD hired to assist in the hiring process, or the search process, has screened the candidates based on the leadership profile that was developed for the district, and they presented to the board a slate of top candidates for us to consider interviewing. Last night, the board met in executive session and selected a group of semifinalists to interview, and that will be done remotely. And that will be done towards the end of this week and during the weekend. From these remote interviews, the board will publicly announce a group of finalists early next week and proceed to a second round of interviews that will be done in person, although still in executive session. Around that time, late next week, the board will also host forums for staff members and forums for members of the community for each of the finalists. And I would just ask that people stay tuned in. We will be announcing those dates very soon. I actually don't know quite when we're announcing those, but it'll be towards the end of the week that we'll do that next week. So that's kind of what I prepared as comments. Were there any questions or comments from other board members as to how that's proceeding? I think board members all know what's going on at this point, and the schedules are out. as of today, right? Everybody's in tune with that. Okay, so that's the update on the superintendent search. Wanted everybody in the public to have an opportunity to hear how that's proceeding. It's going to come to a conclusion very quickly, and by the middle of April, I believe this district will know who its new superintendent will be, so if everything goes smoothly. All right, other board members have updates or topics they'd bring up? Okay, go ahead, Kristen, and then we'll go with DJ after that.
Okay, I just wanted to give a brief update on the CAC, the Community Accountability Committee. And so Civic Canopy is the facilitation company that has been charged with engaging and connecting and facilitating the diverse group and to help us make thoughtful and meaningful decisions regarding SROs and PSD schools. I wanted to say thanks to every person who has been giving up their Thursday evenings to work on the Community Advisory Council with the end goal of making recommendations to the Board of Education. It has not been easy, so thank you. And it has been time consuming. It's been every Thursday minus spring break and the week before, and that's pretty much it. So since October, yes, thank you, since October. So it's been a long haul, so thank you for doing that. The group has been challenged with the speed of the vote. There are only 3 meetings left for the CAC to come to some agreement as to what the recommendations will be. And due to the narrow scope of the group's decisions, important discussions such as restorative practices, supportive school culture, code of conduct, and mental health, just to name a few, have taken on a lesser role than many members would have liked. And right now, where we are is the community engagement surveys, the subgroup created. They've been distributed to students, parents, and the community. We're gathering the information, and the CAC will review it. And we will also, the Civic Canopy will also lead the group in forming recommendations to the board for delivery on April 27th. So, just to sort of summarize what we're learning on this, that this is not just a question of SROs. It's a question of school discipline, equity, and dignity. This group has made us acutely aware of the work PSD still needs to do with discipline in each building and as a district, what safety means for students individually and as a whole, and restorative practices, such as how do we do more for our students to keep them out of the judicial system, and how can we maintain those practices once they've been established, just to name a few. So regardless of the recommendations the CAC gives the board on April 27th, Poudre School District students and staff are richer for going through this process. It informs us of the work we need to do, big and small, to truly rethink safety and inclusivity. To this end, we're hoping that some of the members of the CAC might wish to continue the conversations that would focus on human dignity and equity as a whole in PSD by applying to become members of the EDAC committee in the following year. And we can get more information on that. But, you know, and just in summary, it's been short, it's been quick, and it's been narrowly focused. And that's what we had asked for. And what we're realizing and what we're learning is that, and what we, I think, knew probably going into is that this needs to be a broader conversation and an ongoing conversation. But they're focused, they're ready to go, they're ready to deliver something on April 27th. So that's pretty much it. Naomi, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just say that it's a great group with some various perspectives. Everyone is working really, really hard. Everyone brought concerns and in every aspect, both with SROs in the building or without SROs in the building, concerns and celebrations, both with SROs in the building and without SROs in the building, and they've done a lot of really, really good work. It's a really big question, and so I don't think that the conversation is ending. Right, we're going to continue to have the conversations happening, and we look forward to, as a board, digging into the information that they present to us next month.
Okay, thanks for those updates. And before we push on, I just want to make sure if any board members have any questions or comments relative to the work that's going on with the CAC, so we get them out there for Kristen and Naomi to present. Okay. It seemed like a good enough update at this time. Okay. One question on my part, just the, Could you just repeat, there's a survey that has been put out to the entire PSD community, is that correct? And who prepared that?
I don't think it's the entire PSD community. It's a selection of parents and a selection of community members. And it was prepared in tandem with Dr. Dwayne Schmidt. If my family received the survey as parents, and it came from Dwayne Schmidt as the email address. So if you see an email from Dr. Dwayne Schmidt, that is the survey. A section of the survey does deal with COVID matters and different things about COVID. So if you started that survey and you didn't get to the SRO question, please make sure that you complete the entire survey. It is very short and it only takes a few minutes to complete.
And there's a subcommittee as well that from the CAC that put together the questions for that particular part of the questionnaire. And then I believe Dwayne just tweaked those questions from that subcommittee. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, DJ, you want to give us your update?
Yeah, I just want to talk about the legislative committee. And first off, the waiver to alter the tests have been sent into the federal government. It's been signed by the governor, and that's been done. So hopefully you all hear something within a couple weeks. And the second thing I wanted to talk about that we discussed that, as we just heard with SRO talk, is there's a Senate Bill 182, which has been introduced, which is titled School Discipline. And I describe it as a big old bucket that they put a lot of stuff in. And it has got stuff in there about having the state board require districts to report discipline data and break it down by different subgroups, which that part sounds kind of good. I think if we had a standard definition for some of those might be good. But this thing then goes, like I said, it has a lot, so I'm not going to go through them all. But then it goes to procedures for SROs and what they can and can't do in schools that they want to. My personal feeling is this is probably going to get tweaked some here, and so our subcommittee is going to send it to Todd and see what his group feels about it a little bit too, and to get more information about how CASB and other groups feel. Because we do hear it here in our district quite a bit, but this has been a national conversation for some time and statewide too. So I do want to bring it up that, there is something at the state level that is looking to try to do something, and we want to be a voice to try to get something that at least is good through the legislation. They are, it sounded like putting it off for a couple weeks to get some more feedback a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see if there are some amendments on there. And, oops, I think that was the only one I was going to bring up today. Yeah. Did anybody else from the subcommittee have something?
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on this, Bill,
Yep.
I feel like this is an opportunity for us to, again, celebrate the work that our district is doing, because
Yes.
a part of what the bill is asking for is for school districts to track based on these subgroups of disability, gender, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, to disaggregate it so that they can look deeply into what is going on in their individual districts. And so for me, this was a moment to celebrate and say, our district has started doing this work because we value it so much, and we didn't necessarily need this bill in order to make that happen. And we look forward to other districts following suit on their own or through the urgency of this bill.
Okay, good. Thank you. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that it's a 30-page bill with a lot of new language, so there's a lot there to consider, and it may be that some of the practices we're doing as a school district, it may be easier rather than more difficult to comply with some of this if the language survives. So it may or may not be onerous for our district to comply with. We'll just have to see how it comes out and participate in the process.
Thank you. Other board member updates or comments, agenda items? Go ahead, Kristen.
This is slightly different. I just wanted to go ahead and, if I could, just extend, as Renee so eloquently stated earlier, and community comments, just extend our heartfelt wishes and thoughts. I don't want to say thoughts and prayers. I'm tired of saying thoughts and prayers, but just know that to the families that lost and friends that lost loved ones in Boulder this yesterday, and also to the people who lost friends and loved ones a week ago in Atlanta. But I think people here are feeling this acutely in Boulder. So to all of those who lost friends and families, to members, to the police officer who ran towards danger when they did not have to, I just want to acknowledge their pain, their loss, and I would just really like to say enough is enough. I don't know what else to say other than if you do need to reach out, there is the Colorado Crisis Services. There's a crisis hotline, 1-844-493-TALK. That's 1-844-493-8255 for support for anyone affected by mental health, substance abuse, or emotional crisis. So if you need to talk to someone, you can always do that. But I just have to say enough is enough. Thanks.
Thank you for making those comments, Kristen. Just hard to know what to say, so much appreciated. Any other board comments or agenda items, topics? Okay. Seeing none, we'll proceed, and that'll bring us to item 5.0 on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. So would anybody like to pull anything from consent this evening? Okay, seeing none, I would take a motion for the consent agenda. Go ahead, Nate.
I move that the board approve and adopt the recommended actions for the items on the consent agenda.
Thank you. And I have a second from Kristen Draper. And Jill, I'd take a roll call vote, please.
Aye.
Aye.
Kristen Draper.
Aye.
Christoph Beth.
Aye.
Naomi Johnson.
Aye.
Rob Pedersen.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, and that brings us to action items 6.0 on the agenda. Item 6.1 is the Second Amendment to the provision of child care services at Poudre School District Elementary Schools between Alpha Best Education, Inc. and Poudre School District R1. Could I get a motion for this action? Go ahead, Nate.
Yes, I move that the board approve the Second Amendment to the provision of child care services at Poudre School District Elementary Schools between Alpha Best Education Incorporated and Poudre School District R1, and authorize the Second Amendment to be signed by the board president, attested by the board secretary.
Thank you. Do I have a second? I have a second from DJ Anderson. Okay, and to be clear, Rob and I just asked that this be put as an action item rather than into consent, just because this was an item that had a lot of discussion in prior years. It's there just to make sure it's present, but that said, are there any questions or comments regarding this? There were a couple asked in emails, but if anybody... Okay, go ahead, Nate.
Is this primarily an extension of the previous contract with the addition of a annual registration fee?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, oh, go ahead, Todd.
I would just like to add, I appreciate just an opportunity to acknowledge That's a new partner. We're at about 9 months in or so with them. I think Scott and Tracy could both attest. They've been a wonderful partner coming through at a time when there was so much uncertainty. Earlier this year, as we worked with our kids and tried to find the best ways to keep them safe, educate them in a virtual environment, Dave McClure, the local director, and Judy Nee, who is the president of the organization, have done nothing but support the district. They've pretty much been, the answer is yes, what's the question? So they have pulled their resources, they have partnered with local nonprofits, they have extended their staff. I can't think of anything we've asked them to do that they haven't gone above and beyond on. I just want to publicly recognize that. I know they came in, and we had a lot of discussion about how that went last year, and I appreciate it being here out in the open, but I think the board should know that the system feels like they've been a wonderful partner.
Very good. I actually appreciate you guys taking a few moments to express that. It's important for us to hear. Any other questions or comments? And by the way, I believe this will be coming up every year, right? We'll be doing this as a one-year extension every year from now on. Okay. Go ahead, DJ.
I guess I would like to just to appreciate all of the work they did with the roller coaster of a year. And I do also want to make sure that we as a board stay true to make sure that we look on it next year after they have maybe a more regular year to see how that process is and make sure that we acknowledge that there were people that wanted to make sure that we were doing the right thing for these kids. So we are going to keep that at the forefront, and we will continue to watch.
Very good comment. I think that's a very fair statement. After a real year, we should slow down and take a look at it. So, okay. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Okay. Seeing none, Jill, I'd take a roll call vote, please.
DJ Anderson.
Aye.
Nate Donovan.
Aye.
Kristen Draper.
Aye.
Christoph Fev.
Aye.
Naomi Johnson.
Aye.
Rob Pedersen.
Aye.
Carolyn Reed.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you very much. Item 6.2 on the agenda is a resolution in support of International Transgender Day of Visibility. And could I get a motion for this one, please? Go ahead, Kristen.
I move that the board support the resolution, adopt the resolution in support of International Transgender Day of Visibility.
Thank you. Do I have a second? I'll pick Carolyn for a second, Carolyn Reed. And with that, Kristen, would you like to read the resolution out loud for all
Absolutely.
of us, please?
Resolution of the Poudre School District Board of Education in support of International Transgender Day of Visibility, March 31st, 2021. Whereas International Transgender Day of Visibility, which takes place annually on March 31st, was created in 2009 to celebrate the achievements, contributions, and accomplishments of transgender and gender nonconforming people. And whereas Poudre School District is committed to providing a safe and welcoming learning environment where all students, employees, and community members are supported regardless of their gender identity. And whereas the board wholeheartedly embraces Poudre School District's transgender and gender nonconforming students, employees, and community members for the diversity they bring to our schools and workplaces, and strives to ensure that they are seen, accepted, and celebrated for who they truly are. And whereas, while Poudre School Board, administration, and staff have committed to make Poudre School District a welcoming community for all students and staff, we recognize there is more work ahead of us. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Board of Education does hereby proclaim March 31st, 2021 as International Transgender Day of Visibility in Poudre School District, and encourages students and staff to celebrate those who share their power of living their truth, and encourage our community to continue the efforts of moving towards equality and fairness for all transgender and gender nonconforming students, staff, friends, neighbors, and community members.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And with that, I'll open it up to any board comments, possibly questions.
Well, I'll just throw in there, if anybody is wanting to learn more about this, the CSU Pride Center has, on March 31st, they'll be doing a presentation on transgender and Day of Visibility that you can join. So that will be I believe that is online and at the Pride Center at CSU. And out Boulder will be doing Transgender Awareness Week starting tomorrow and throughout the week. So you can always look on their website, and you can always go to nocoequality.org, and you can find some information there on Transgender Awareness Week as well.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, I'll just say that I want to especially thank some of our public commenters tonight that helped explain and make clear, reinforce really, why it's very important for us to pass a resolution like this and to support the underlying truth of it, the underlying meaning of it in our words, in our policies, and in our actions. So I'm definitely supportive of passing this resolution.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. DJ, did you? Oh, okay. All right. In that case, I'll just say a few things. First of all, thank you, Kristen, for bringing this forward for us. And Rob, I really agree with your comments. I think the comments we got this evening were apt and profound and important for all of us. I can't believe how the world has changed since my time here at Poudre School District. It is really, really a different world that we all live in. But that said, I do think there are times that it is important we call these things out. People question this, but it's still not an easy path for many of people in our society. And I think that actively showing support and letting people know that our district is inclusive of all people, and we're trying so hard to make a safe place for everybody in our environment, is very important. So I can't thank you enough for bringing the resolution forward, and I can't say enough about how I support this resolution for our district. So with that, if there are no other comments, I'll take a roll call vote, please. Jill.
DJ Anderson.
Aye.
Nate Donovan.
Aye.
Kristen Draper.
Aye.
Christoph Fev.
Aye.
Naomi Johnson.
Aye.
Rob Pedersen.
Aye.
Carolyn Reed.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Excellent. We're already through the action items, and we haven't even made it to 6:30. We're doing really well. So I'm curious what Jill had. Is it time? Okay, so 7.0 on the work session topics would be the work session topics. 7.1 is an update on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and for students and staff, and I believe I'm turning that over to you, Dr. Lambert.
President Fev, thank you. Board, following up on our promise to continue to provide updates on our work with equity, diversity, and inclusion, and tonight has a little bit of a different slant. What I'm going to speak about this evening are the action steps that our staff and our students are taking. I know that our work with equity is comprehensive and broad, involves community, parents, and others, but tonight the focus is on our students and our staff inside our schools. To give you a good look at where we're going. Our end in mind goal tonight is to get you informed with a succinct update. I know we'll be giving a few of these before the end of the school year. When we're done, after we're finished, we just have about 4 or 5 slides here. When those are wrapped up, I'm going to invite Mr. John McKay to join us, and then you can use this team with Scott, Tracy, and myself, as well as John, for some question and answers at the end. We'll make sure we leave enough time for that. But if all things are good, Lauren, let's get rolling on this. All right, I won't read this slide to you, but these are the topics we're primarily going to review tonight. You'll see a nice blend of things that are going on with our students, things that are going on with staff, as well as some of the practical steps we're taking to advance this work. I know before we go off this slide, I just want to make one comment. I hear a lot in the system that this work is difficult, that it's hard. It's not. It's the right work to do. It's courageous work. Getting it all together, organizing people, and doing all those things in a 30,000 student district may be hard, but this work's not hard. It's the right work to do. And I just want to get that message out there. I know it doesn't always make people feel comfortable, make them feel vulnerable, Might make them feel awkward, but at the same time, this is the work we do on behalf of our students and staff to make a better community. And I just want to make sure we get that message out there. But you can see the work that's out there. I want you to pay particular attention to the last one. That's what we're going to wrap up tonight on future policy considerations. A couple things going on in the system. I want to make you aware. I think you'll be eager to hear about those, and I want to give you a little bit of a timeline for that work as well. Okay? All right, we'll go on to the next slide. Broke this slide down in two groups. We have a staff equity coalition, a student equity coalition, and we'll start with the staff first. That group, as you can see there, continues to meet on a monthly basis. But what I think is important for you to know right now is that group has divided itself into some groups to take on some particular issues, particular topics. For example, we have a group working on equity and discipline. I know that's an interesting topic for us. We're paying attention to discipline statistics. Our staff are living that world, and they have a lot of input on that to help make that process more equitable, more balanced, more transparent. It's one of the groups that's working very hard. We also have a professional learning group through Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and they're just working on various skills, concepts, things that are really important in this work. Some examples of that include culturally responsive teaching, some of our restorative practices in pedagogy, which has really taken off. That work has been fantastic. I really commend Kate Clifford, John McKay, and the team that are pushing that work forward. We've had a lot of participation in that. And we also do another area in there that's really important is our work in reflective practices. I think we grow and learn through our reflection, and our staff are finding that out. It's all really exciting stuff. And then we also are continuing to advance our work on principles of community, and we'll be sharing a lot more about that as we come into next fall. We're really proud of that work. A couple other areas that are really great, or at least one in particular. We have getting ready to start the process of staff affinity groups. What a great step. This is two groups we have going on right now with our BIPOC and LGBTQIA+. They begin in April, and we're going to have great opportunities for staff to work together, to share common experiences, and again, for the whole purpose of trying to get the organization to grow, to help our students see themselves in our work and help our staff as well, and to create a more inclusive environment. Been really proud of the work these groups have been doing, and great leadership there, and we're just getting started. I mean, we really are truly just getting starting as a learning organization in this work, so really great stuff. On the student side, a little bit different. We have a student equity coalition, and it's been a great learning experience for us to try to bring students together in this particular world here, in a virtual world. As you know, our students have been going into school virtually, and so to get meetings together, we've learned it's a little tougher to get them in those spots. We had two meetings, one where we only were able to get one student, another one where we had, I think, 5 or 6. That's not discouraging. We're learning along the way, and so what's going to happen as we've moved into phase 4, those that are organizing that work are finding different ways to bring students together in person, take advantage of coming back together. That's great stuff. The other part, too, is outside of the Student Equity Coalition, we have students doing courageous work outside of those boundaries in our schools. They are advocating for themselves, their classmates. They are in teaching mode, learning mode, doing a lot of work. So I don't want you to think that all of our work with students is limited to a coalition. In fact, there's a lot of great stuff going on in many of our buildings. So students would make you very proud. But here's just a couple of examples of the action work students and staff have taken since then. We also have some specific examples at sites. We call those site-based equity collectives. So we go to the next slide. We only put 4 up there, but I can tell you that there are a lot more. We just picked 4 that I thought stood out, trying to give you a look at the balance across the system. Dunn Elementary is doing some great work with students. As you know, Dunn's an IB school, has a lot of great experience of bringing students in as decision makers, as citizens of the world. They have really adapted well to this, talking to their students about how they create a more inclusive climate and culture in the school. So great stuff there. Fossil Ridge has a really active student group, and the adults in that building are working with students to create a council for leadership to help make decisions, find balance. Very proud of their work as well. Great leadership of students and adults in that spot. Lincoln Middle School, Penny Stiers, the principal there, is leading some great book study work. Staff has been very receptive, very eager, and they're finding out the more they do, the more they like that work, and it makes a real impact on what's going on. Finally, I want to recognize Kelby Benedict and the Wellington staff. And again, these are just 4 examples of many across the system. But Kelby has taken on this work with his staff, and they have covered many things. In fact, I couldn't think of a better way to put it, so up on the slide I put many areas, because they're just doing many things. They're studying pronouns, talking about what that means with students. They have a book study going on. They're having very courageous conversations that can sometimes be uncomfortable. So I just wanted to put a plug in for the Wellington Middle School staff for their courage, dedication. It's been great work up there. As the next update comes, I'll pick 4 other locations across the district, give you some updates on that as well. We also have some extensive staff professional learning going on. In addition to book studies and other work like that, we are really working with our GSA Spectrum Club sponsors to support resources. What we have found is we're not consistent across the district. We have some schools doing great work with that. We have others that want to do great work and need access to resources and learning. That's getting promoted right now. We're bringing the coordinators together and trying to find that common ground and create more of a resource bank for them. We had some great anti-racist facilitation training. I know Scott took part in that. I think about 70 or so staff members took part in that. That was a real success. They did that virtually. It was over an extended period of time. Scott, I'm not sure how long that lasted, but how many sessions?
I participated in 6 sessions, 4 in October and 2 that last week and the week before.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people have had some really great comments about what they learned through that. It doesn't always the case when you go to professional development, right? You take a chance, sometimes you roll the dice. This work turned out to be fantastic. I think testimony from people, they felt like it was a really great start for them, and they felt that they could be advocates for that work because of that training. As I mentioned, we have staff book studies. People are opted into those. They have choice. They're learning about various topics for their own particular growth. I mentioned the secondary school restorative practices work that's going on, the pedagogy study with that, and I think restorative practices, we are just getting ready to hit our stride with that work. We're talking a lot about how that work's going to get advanced, who's going to lead that work, what kind of resources we may need, but we find some great promises with that. Now, the last one on there is not quite cooked up yet, but there are talks right now of us working with CSU to start thinking about how we can partner together in our equity, diversity, and inclusion work. I don't want to put out there that the module is developed yet, but the desire is there, the willingness is there, and we're trying to work together, and I'll keep you updated on that one. That one's really promising. We're excited about that, to work with our friends at CSU. They have led the way in our community. It's been mentioned tonight. I know Kristen mentioned them and the work they do, the outreach. They are great partners for us, and we can learn from them. And so we're going to take advantage of that. All right, upcoming action steps. This is the one where we probably can have some discussion, and I know John's going to join us here in just a minute. This is our last page. I promised you a succinct update. I'm doing my best on that one. Let's talk policy considerations for a moment. There is a lot of work inside the system. Autumn is involved in this, Scott is involved in this, and others, about how we handle symbols of hate. And the reason I bring this up to you now is you can expect sometime in April, maybe early May, a proposal of how we can adjust our policy to reflect our commitment to putting this out. We've talked about it for a while. In fact, we've tread water on it probably for a little while. I think we had some momentum going right before COVID to push this forward, and we didn't want to lose the initiative. And so you are going to get a proposal from a group. Autumn will help work with that. That'll ask for us to consider how we deal with symbols of hate. The reason it's coming to you in April or May is it may have implications for the code of conduct. If we're going to put it in the code of conduct, we have to get that going. We have to get that done before the spring. We know it's an important thing. There may be a few other ones in that work, but the one I think you're probably going to notice the most is about symbols of hate. We have places you can see that have done some of that work. We'll give you some preview of that as we get ready to position you for that. But we think it has some real promise in the system, and it's long overdue. Finally, bias reporting. I know a lot of you have been very interested in our work with the bias reporting mechanism that we're putting into place. I want to let you know that work is on track. It's the right work. We underestimated how much preparation a site would need to be ready for that kind of reporting to take place. There's just procedures, how things reported, how are they handled, how are they communicated to the principal, how does the staff understand when someone makes that kind of report. Our parents and our students in that model will be able to go to the school website. They'll be able to fill out a bias report, incident report. That'll come to a central location. John can talk more about that when he joins us. But it's important work and it's courageous work. What we want to make sure we do is that we do it right. Our goal will be to try to start that work right around April 1st. If we think we're not quite ready April 1st and we got to go April 8th, we're going to do it. We're going to do it the right way because we know we're paving the way for 45 other schools to do this work, and we'll have some learning experiences from it. You can see the schools we put there. I know that Scott and Tracy, John, and others have met with those schools, talked with them. They're listening to their questions. I wouldn't say there's so much their concerns, but they want to do it right as well. They know a lot's riding on that. We're really excited about that, and not a lot of places are willing to take that step. Our schools are. But again, I just want to make it clear that work is going to be difficult. That is going to be a change for how things go. And we got to make sure our sites are prepped for that, but we're still on track. We're not turning back. We're going to do that. We'll learn a lot from those 5 locations. I know Scott and Tracy will be heavily involved in that work, as well as John and his team. And we're real excited about it, actually. Like I said, we just want to make sure we nail it, right? Because it's a big thing and it's a great feature for our school district. It's a great opportunity for us to take care of our kids, take care of our families. So we'll tread slowly there until we make sure it's almost perfect. I think that's about it for the slides. I want to invite John to come in and join us. Hi, John. We made him wait over in the doorway until we were fully wrapped up. But we got you a chair. Yeah, we were kind of joking with you. Maybe you just have to stand there, John, and take some questions. I don't want you to think you got to fire all your questions at John. Think of us as a team. There are a lot of other people we're supporting with this group. A lot of staff out there finding their way, doing remarkable stuff. So I'm going to open the floor, President Febb, for any questions we may have. You can direct them at any individual or just all of us, and one of us will pick it up.
Very good. Thank you. You modeled crisp and quick very well there.
I'm under a lot of pressure
here.
here.
That was great. Welcome to the meeting, John, and let's open it up to board questions or comments. Go ahead, DJ, and then Carolyn.
Would you like to share what bias reporting, what that means to you guys and what you are going to test in these 4 schools?
That would be great. I think I'll hand that over at first to Scott and Tracy. They've been in some deep meetings. Maybe Scott can talk a little bit about his experience with secondary, and Tracy could add in on that too.
DJ, I think it's a good question because, and I think what we'll learn is what is the threshold to end up in a bias reporting, because we have situations that are reported to teachers and principals, assistant principals all the time, right? There are students that come forward, and we want to continue with that voice. And we want to continue working through those situations and trying to restore. And as we continue to get better in that model, we believe our schools will respond better. This reporting tool is when situations get beyond that, or when, for whatever reason, there may be something interfering with that. A student, a parent that feels uncomfortable going to the school. The tool actually gives them a mechanism to report something that's happened to them. I think about a situation we heard in front of the board a couple of years ago where there was a student who was experiencing some, I think there was swastika involved, as I recall, and some language that was anti that student, right? So there was, and a perception the school wasn't responding. And so this gives them a mechanism to report. Goes right to John and team, and they will then dig in and try to figure out how do we build some capacity to respond. And we'll be able to monitor what are we seeing, what kinds of things are happening in our district that are rising to that level. We have conversations with what are we seeing at the school, but many times those aren't being reported, or if they're being reported, it may be to the board or to Dr. Lambert. And so this gives people, hopefully we will teach them, it gives them a chance to go to John and team, and for John and team to work with the team at the school, whatever school it's coming from, to work through and model how we can handle these challenging conversations in a way that can get us to a learning opportunity for all parties involved. This is a good start. John or Tracy, you want to add?
I'll just add that, as Scott said, it's removing a barrier to letting us know if there's a concern in the system, that when we know about it, we want to do better. And so that whatever mechanism, whether it's coming directly to the school principal or to the person of concern. If someone's not comfortable with that, we want to remove that barrier, and this is a way to remove that barrier.
So DJ, I think the original question was, what is a bias incident? And so we define that as an act of threatening, harassing, intimidating, that's discriminatory or hostile behavior towards a student or an individual in our schools. That can be a microaggression, that can be stating something using a derogatory word that doesn't uphold that student's dignity. That can also be an act. And so when we think about a bias, we really think about just protected classes, persons or groups based off of race and culture, ethnicity, religion, national origin, immigration or citizenship status, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or disability. So when we talk about a bias incident reporting mechanism, these are the types of incidences that we would suspect would be reported to our department. And really just know that it's really to provide families and students who feel they've been targeted a safe way to report incidents of bias, provide an opportunity to respond with dignity so that we can uphold who they are, and make sure that we have a restorative lens on this work. You know, we can't always take a punitive lens to this. We need to be restorative in our practices. And that's when we talk about restorative practice and pedagogy, that it's an opportunity for us to restore that relationship. It's a teachable moment. We are in the business of teaching and learning. We want to be able to foster that and promote that even when there's been infractions through discipline, through identity, through expression. We want to make sure to be able to uphold that. And really, it's a systemic way for us to assess how do we respond to these issues with professional development. This goal isn't to have gotchas. This goal is to be able to work collaboratively with schools as a team to be able to uphold a student and a family's dignity. So that's really the purpose of our incident bias reporting mechanism.
Thank you for sharing that definition and that stuff out there. I think that's important that we communicate that as much as possible.
Okay, Carolyn?
So I think that DJ's question kind of answered mine, so maybe I'll ask a little bit of a different question then. It says here you're going to be piloting this at Blevins Bolts, Fossil Ridge High School, right? And Lincoln and Zach. And so what would that look like if I'm a student and I feel like I've been, there's been an act of bias against me? I'm a student, how am I going to know where to go, how to report it, and what's going to happen to my report after I've made it?
I appreciate that question very much. So that's part of the challenge of how to really start informing and be informed with as a system. So there's going to be a couple things that schools are going to start experiencing. So Blevins, my twins go to Blevins. They're both 8th graders right now. So first and foremost, when we spoke with the Student Equity Coalition and showed them this incident bias reporting mechanism, they gave great feedback. They had lots of great questions, and they said, we asked, how would you want to learn about this? And they said, well, through our teachers, because our teachers are the ones that need to know about what biases are, and it's a teachable moment for them, and then we can actually have conversations about it, and then we'd know how that's really going to transpire in our classrooms, our hallways, cafeterias. So part of this work is meeting with principals. We met with some principals this morning, actually this afternoon, and talked about some of the process that we're going to engage in. So part of it is communicating first and foremost to the principal, giving them some sort of form template that they can personalize to their school community, that we have this bias incident reporting platform that we're going to be piloting at these schools. Then it's also being able to create mechanisms to inform staff and let them know that this is a learning opportunity, and giving them guidance and opportunities to be able to then speak to students. Now, we may not do that in the whole pilot immediately, but what we will do is communicate to parents and families and students about what a bias incident is, or bias is. First and foremost, the thing that we always want to foster is a relationship between school and home. We want to always, and also between teacher and student. So if there's something that's happened, we want them to still go to students or to teachers, to their principal, to their counselor, and foster that relationship within the school and the community. If they feel like there isn't a good way to report that, that's where a bias incident reporting mechanism is really useful. Or if they've addressed it and it didn't really quite sit well with them, this is another opportunity for them to be able to come and speak and have mutual accountability. That's what we want, accountability to our community, and for us to be able to respond appropriately with dignity. So how would a student know? We would be informing them about what a bias is, where they could access it. There will be a link on each individual school website that they'll be able to access it, and then they would be able to fill that out and it would come to us. We are working in collaboration with school contacts, so we've asked every school to identify one person to be able to work with. So it's not a, we're going to solve it for you. It's, hey, we had an incident come in. We're going to contact the contact at the school, and we're going to say, how are we going to team together? What do you know? You know, we're going to have lots of different experiences with this. So some principals or contacts will say, oh, I've met with that family a few times already. Or they're going to be saying, I haven't heard anything about this. Or this is really challenging to me. I'm not really sure. I thought that we'd already talked about this, but obviously we didn't fix it. And so how are we going to go into that conversation and that problem-solving process then?
Okay, thank you. Kristen.
So for those that don't, those incidents that don't get to a bias report, they do work it out with their teacher, or they work it out with their principal or whatever in their building. Do we have a mechanism to track that? Because I think that also is a learning experience. If we have X number of certain bias incidents happening that we're fixing in school, and that's good, but we can sort of pass that along to other schools and say, this is something that we have an unconscious bias that this is happening more than we thought it did. Is there a tracking mechanism for that, and then therefore a learning mechanism for that later on?
So I think my initial reaction is one of the incredible things that happened in the collaboration with principals when we were speaking to this is they said, can I self-report if I have something that's come in and either I need help with or that we've worked on and we see as a recurring theme? Can I report so that we have some way to be able to track that, hey, this is something that we need some support with, because this data will help identify, it's like a part of a needs assessment of being able to identify how we need to allocate resources to professional development, to programming, to staffing, all of those components based on what we're responding to. Now, do we have a natural mechanism within our schools that haven't been reported to us if the school doesn't report? Not necessarily, but we do have mechanisms related to positive behavior support. We also have mechanisms within Synergy. So there are different opportunities, but that's part of the learning that we're going to embark in. And I don't know if Scott and Tracy would like to add any additional information.
I would just add that part of one of the opportunities for growth for us, and this is more related to restorative practices, but the two go hand in hand, right? Because as we're restoring, Synergy right now does not have a plethora of opportunity to put in restorative practices that you're utilizing, right? We have all these, our typical responses behaviorally, and we're building out what the restorative practices bank, if you will, would look like. And that is a way to say, here's an incident, and document that as we do now with any behavioral incident we deal with, and here's how we responded. So there will be mechanisms to track. It's tough because which conversation rise to the level of tracking, and you know there's some opinion you have as a professional as to when does it get to that spot. But I think an awareness, and Tracy I think said it right, as we start to identify and make aware through this model, also then through training that we've got to do on the backside to help prepare our staff, both to teach about the reporting mechanism, but also how we responded and repairing, which lives again with the restorative work we're doing. So the things are kind of hand in glove.
Naomi.
This all sounds really wonderful, and I just want to say thank you so much for the work here. I feel like we've got extremely well-meaning staff and students in our district, and a lot of the microaggressions or things that come up, people would say, oh, I didn't know, it was just a joke. How are we front-loading to say this is teaching you, both staff and students, and not if I get called into Dr. Lambert's office to talk about a bias incident, it's not like this is a mark on your permanent record, giant red X, but truly, like John, you were saying, a teachable moment to make me a better person. It seems like that's a very delicate situation to front load all of that.
I know they may have something to add to that. Naomi, it's a good point, because I think if we're going to grow and we tell people to be vulnerable, we have to give them a safe space to be vulnerable. And so I think John's mentioned it before a couple of times tonight. We're a learning organization, and this is learning just like anything else that we do. And I think if we have people who feel like they can't learn and it's not safe, it's going to defeat the purpose. It's counterproductive to what we're trying to do. I think one of the hardest parts of moving forward here is for people not to feel like a gotcha, to feel like you said, I didn't mean that. There's a difference in it was just a joke. That only goes so far. But for someone who legitimately is in a learning position, we want to use it as a teachable moment for growth. So I think it's about the mindset going in. That message is very clear to our people. In a learning mode, we're going to continue to use this as a growth opportunity. Now, of course, in any situation, if people don't learn or we have challenges, that's when we'll take different kinds of steps. But I think we're going in with the best intentions. I really do. And I hear that with our principals. I hear our principals wanting to be learners too. It's not like they're the only experts or somehow that they'll hold that over staff. That's not the mindset at all, at least not the ones I'm talking with. I think it'll be a challenge to keep that place, because people will feel like maybe they got in trouble or where they are, but that's not the approach we're going to take.
And that I think what Dr. Lambert just said, I think is pretty critical. And we heard that pretty loud and clear from the principals, right? I mean, they're stepping in. They need to be provided a place to step in to be vulnerable as well. Recognize we're going to learn and grow as an organization, and we'll walk that alongside the administrators, and we're going to be doing our learning. They're going to be doing their learning, and it's going to help ultimately for students to do the learning as well. But to be able to do it in a safe place, and you're right, Naomi, to not have it be held against any adult or any student as they're doing their learning and given an opportunity to speak to repair themselves as well as the other side.
I guess the only thing that I would add, Naomi, is there's this concept of coaching for equity, that you have to build people up and not tear people down. And it's aligned with a comprehensive approach. The work that we're doing here can't work in isolation. It can't be incident bias and not have restorative practices. So the work that Kate Clifford, Leah Hager, Kate Kanine, Jenny Putnam, there are so many incredible stakeholders that are doing really courageous, hard work. And we see it even, we've always talked about how the things outside of the walls that we teach within impact what happens within those walls. And most recently, I would be remiss not to mention that we do want to stand in solidarity with our American Asian Pacific Island the community here in PSD. And when you think about that, one of the questions that one of my team members always asks me is, what are you learning and unlearning? Because it's going to take our system some time to unlearn. And to do that, what are the visuals that we're representing for our Asian American Island Pacific community? What are the different words that we're using? How are we celebrating lots of different components? Because they're a minority within our community, how are we centering their perspectives and listening to their voices about what's it like to work here, what's it like to learn here, right? So those are the types of experiences that we really need to be courageous and engaging in, and that's where incident of bias can't go without restorative practice, without culturally responsive, without anti-racist facilitation training. It is a comprehensive approach, and we can't do it in isolation. So it's going to take some work, but we are definitely committed to action.
Thank you. All of that sounds really great, and I know that in this thinking, we expect that at some point a staff member or a student, probably both, probably multiple of both, will feel defensive about being called out on something that they did not realize was a problem. And I am excited that we're talking about educating and growth as a part of this, because I think that this is yet another opportunity for us to really dig into our mission of creating some excellent future citizens for our world. Thank you.
I'll toss a question in. One thing that came to mind through the slide set, I was wondering if there's any of the data we're tracking today that might help us create an outcome benchmark or a way to see if we're getting results we're hoping for, as we're talking about all these various mechanisms we're going to train into the system, we're going to educate teachers, we're going through all these procedures. And I was reminded that at some point through this complicated year, we saw some information that indicated there may be biases that teachers are having with regards to disciplining students, and that came out relative to SROs, and so it gives some indication that it is in our system. So we may have data. Are we going to look at particular data sets that we might track, would be the question.
The answer to that, Christoph, is yes. We are currently monitoring that, and call it disproportionate outcomes. We have, with whether you're looking at your in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, detention, expulsion, and where's it coming from sites to asking the sites to think about where's it coming from in the building, right? What teachers are having the most referrals, and that data is, as I think Naomi talked about earlier, right, is data that we have now unpacked. We have in visuals that are fairly easy to interpret. And some of that you saw as part of the monitoring report last week that will be outward facing. So again, as a district, we're working to unpack and try to be transparent with what we can. We're not going to be as transparent as where's discipline coming from in a school or even school-specific outward-facing right now. But inwardly, we're having the conversation about where are our disproportionalities, not just in terms of discipline, in terms of what are opportunities for students too. All of that we believe will help us to think about and get at root cause for some of the disproportionality and outcomes, which ultimately is what we're after.
Thank you. Carolyn, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, so I was just looking on the ADL's website for hate symbols, because my next question was going to be to you, how do we identify hate symbols? And I guess I'm finding out here looking at the ADL's website. And so, like, how do we educate kids on how to identify hate symbols? Are those conversations happening? I mean, they talk about hate symbols, you know, hiding in plain sight, and I think decoding this is part of the process of helping kids to identify these symbols. So I just wondered, like, will that be part of the education process that we're going to be going through here?
Yeah, and I think earlier in the year, one of the things we talked about was we brought in a program from the ADL called No Place for Hate, which empowers students to have a place in how do we teach and monitor what's happening inside the schools. As Dr. Lambert talked about, we also are working on language around a policy for us. And our challenge will be potentially, there's a couple pretty easy ones to identify that I think many identify as symbols of hate. But as you're a principal in a building, well, Pepe the Frog was one that popped up a few years ago that you'll probably see on the ADL list as we speak, that wasn't always there, but became a symbol for that, and so we worked with our staff. But it's always changing, right? I mean, it's sort of like back when I was in the classroom, what was considered gang paraphernalia was always changing, right? If you selected a color, they'd move to a different color, and it was there. So there's ongoing, and so in the language we'll create, Carolyn, we're going to kind of toggle between a list like that would support a building if it was being used for, if the symbol was showing up in such a way. It will be hard to teach all the students what all the symbols are because they're, again, always changing. So that's going to be a challenge for us, but helping to build some capacity with our leaders and helping to build some capacity and taking a strong stance on a couple things to start with, I think is a good first step for this district.
Naomi.
Yeah, if I could just piggyback on that for a second. I really don't want to get in a situation where the district is playing whack-a-mole with hate symbols, because just like gang symbols, as soon as we say, we've identified this, so we're not going to allow this anymore, something else pops up to take its place. So that, again, highlights to me the importance of laying the foundation of equity and inclusion, so that we can always point back to that, and it's not about just getting rid of Pepe the Frog, but we're focused on the big picture as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Naomi. It's that proactive approach really lends itself to culture and climate. The reactive actually can do damage to culture and climate. So
I think that's where we speak to the intent versus the impact, right? And so, I think that ideologies matter more than symbols. And so what is the thinking behind that? So that's when we speak to what are we learning and unlearning? And that's why the restorative practices and pedagogy is going to be so important. We don't want a list. We don't want to just have so many things, but there are some pretty obvious pieces that we need to be able to address, to be able to have inclusive environments that aren't going to be triggering and harmful to kids' identities. We want them to feel safe. And so for that, we do need a symbols of hate policy to be able to have a standard of practice and then to be able to learn and grow from. I don't think that we want whack-a-mole, and we're not compliance people. Data tells one part of the story. The story is what really matters. We can compliance people in federal programs with Title I and all of the things that we oversee. We can say you have to do this and this and this. That's never actually changed the culture and the hearts and minds of people. So that's where I really appreciate your statements and your questions, because it really is about changing the ideology, the thinking, and really that's going to gain a further, better student experience down the road.
All right, I'll go with Kristen and then DJ.
So following up with that, and especially for that better student experience, have we considered having some of the students, particularly the secondary students, take a look at the code of conduct and help us when we're rewriting that?
Yes, I think that ultimately my vision of some of the things that the Student Equity Coalition could potentially participate in would be something like that. But I don't want to presume what the Student Equity Coalition wants to be. Kelby Benedict, myself, and Kate Clifford have been the three facilitators that have been participating and working with the Student Equity Coalition. That we've had very success. So, as we've had intermittent attendance, that's not a reflection on students. It's probably more a reflection on the adults trying to facilitate it, because kids show up where they find meaning. And so we're going to have to be able to have accountability for that. That being said, there are students in our system that are, they're all doing incredible work. We've got clubs, we've got groups that we could actually bring in and start looking at that. And that's something that we would intend to do, to start saying, what is your experience with the code of conduct, and have some reflective assessment about what we need to think about in order to have a better experience with that.
Great. DJ.
I got three things here. One, I want to go back to the hate symbol policy aspect, and just, I really appreciate what you said there at the end, John. And I don't want it to be a whack-a-mole system, but I think it's very clear in a majority of our society, there are certain symbols that we agree on that are just shouldn't be out there. And I think it's great that if we can get that into a policy and get something that we can have a backbone about. And so I'm so happy to hear that, and I'm excited to see what we can come up with and we can work with on that. Second thing was, I want to offer, especially to the equity and affinity groups, if they ever want an ear of the board, I'm sure there's a multitude of us, but we'd be willing to come and listen if they need to feel heard or want to share anything in that environment and safe space. And then third, I guess I take this to leadership is that this is a great movement for our district, and we gotta not forget that we also need to take some part of that too, and find time to discuss and look upon ourselves a little bit too, so that make sure that we are seeing the changes that are out there. I think Christoph, you said it so well earlier about the differences of when you were in school and what's out there now, and I just think that we got to make sure that we set time aside for ourselves to engage a little bit in that work and look at ourselves. So yeah, those are my 3 things. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Good comment, DJ. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, so one of the tensions in our school district around a lot of issues is what's sort of centrally mandated or this, and what's up to the schools to implement or decide. And I guess I'd like to understand what your perspective and plans are with regard to that tension, with respect to the EDI policies and implementation.
I would start by saying some of the things we talked about tonight have been asked for by many buildings across the district. They're not going to be open for interpretation, and they're not going to be site-by-site decisions. They really can't be when you're talking about culture and climate. And I think restorative practices is a good example where that wasn't something that some of the middle schools and high schools did. All of them, all the secondary schools participated. And in that launch, if you will, many of our central office departments participated as well. That is a district focus. And we have some work to do in that arena, right? As you ask about that question, Rob, that does interfere with us from time to time, or maybe often. And but as we think about equity and inclusion, it's not going to be optional. The work we're going to dig into can't be optional.
I think the one thing I would add to that question, like Scott answered it just exactly right. Where you'll see some differences will be as principals find growth opportunities, right? Not so much interpretations of expectations, but each of our schools will grow. I mentioned earlier how proud I was of Wellington Middle School to take on some of the tough topics they've taken on. I think you'll see principals, leadership, even staff teams make some determinations about where there are growth opportunities at their respective locations. So you may see different books being looked at, or maybe different topics being done. But as far as expectations of how we do this work, as Scott said, it's very much a systemic plan, not an individual school plan.
Kristen?
So to that end, does that mean that all secondary schools now have some sort of GSA or Spectrum Club?
They all can. They don't all have a school-sponsored club yet, but they're all moving in that direction. They all have the possibility to do that as we speak.
Okay, and they're all school-sponsored, not student-sponsored?
There are school-sponsored across the district. They don't all have school-sponsored at this moment. And there's a couple rationales for that, right? They got to have an adult in the building that will take that on. But I think we're moving in that direction, and we've made a lot of great strides in the last couple years to move from when we couldn't have that, where it had to be student-initiated, to now we have many school-sponsored across the district.
Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, so I just want to follow up my question a little bit. I think I understand the answer that I was given. I appreciate it. To the extent that there is programming, for example, associated with this for students, I'm talking about, although it could be for staff as well, frankly, is the decision about what programming is appropriate a site-based decision? Because we've had that discussion previously on other topics, right? Mental health and bullying and some of those other things, and I'm wondering how those answers intersect with this topic.
I'll tackle, Rob. I think it's nuanced, and I would cite No Place for Hate as an example of programming we brought in, but we didn't bring into all secondary schools this year because the ADL didn't have capacity. to bring into all secondary schools, but the expectation would be all secondary schools are giving students that opportunity to have no place for hate, which gives students a voice and empowers them to take some ownership in the work. As we look at, and I think the board has challenged us to look at best practices, we've got to be able to identify and monitor what practices are we having success with before we ever set forth and said this practice is one everyone will do. And we're not there yet. We're not in a place where we could say this is way better than other practices. We can see promising practices, but I don't know that we are far enough along in the work to say this practice is head and shoulders above others. I think about SEL programs. We have many successful SEL programs in this district. I think about several different ones just at the secondary level. And so if at a moment in time we were to say we're throwing out all of those and everyone's going to go with Oveus, which happens to be the program that CLP Middle School is using and having success with, CLP Middle School would feel like their time was used well, and the other schools that spent time getting their program up and running, having success with, would feel like they're moving backwards a couple years because they're starting over. We were very intentional when we brought in restorative practices to say this umbrella lays over some of the SEL work you do. And this is the expectation we have, is that you will have these types of practices. And oh, by the way, as you look at whether you're talking about Oveus or Second Step or Discovery, here's how they coexist, work together. And we'll have the same conversation, I think, when we start thinking about what it looks like at elementary, right? Because you have, so I think it's nuanced, Rob. I think we got to be mindful about what are the outcomes, where are we seeing successes, monitoring successes, rather than saying we have to unplug everything you're doing and start over all with the same program, of which the needs in every building aren't exactly the same either. So it's a nuanced conversation, but I think you can see some moves as a district that we're saying here's some guardrails or here's some common expectations. And within that, you need to move and do the things you see will work in your building. And then we've got to monitor that.
So, Rob, I guess I would just add to what Scott's saying. I do believe that it's nuanced, but it's not unpredictable. So let's think about the fact that, let me use ELD as an example. We have ELD programming in every school. We have emerging bilingual students in every one of our schools. Every single school has a responsibility to serve our emerging bilingual kids. They might schedule it a little bit differently. What we want to do is be able to, through our ELD action plans, which we've gotten away from in the last couple of years because of COVID last spring and going into this spring, we still have that concept, but it's not necessarily the same because we've evolved with our schools. Our vision would be that our schools would have an understanding that looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion in their school performance framework, in their improvement plans, in the things that they need to be able to report to. What is the data showing them, and what is their climate and culture showing them that they need to attend to? So knowing that, I would expect that each school then would be able to speak to what is it going to take in order to be able to respond to the data and the experiences that their kids are having. How are we assessing what experiences kids are having? So it may not be uniform, but it needs to be articulated and be able to be spoken to and led by that school leader. Now, that being said, keep in mind that one of the things that is really vulnerable for school leadership is not knowing where the district stands. So we have an obligation as district leaders as well to be able to state, here's our standard of practice and this is what we believe is important too. So that's when the board has been articulate about the fact that we want to work towards a district end related to upholding students' dignity. We've talked about our principles of community. We've talked about all of these different components that we really want to foster and promote in our district. When the district has a vision, the schools know where they can fit into that, and we can have mutual accountability of how we're going to respond to it to make sure that every school is upholding and being inclusive of all the students in their community. But our schools are different. We have schools on the south end that are different than our midtown schools, that are different than our mountain schools, than our Wellington schools. So we want to have a standard practice that we're attending to that. It might just look a little bit different how we're implementing and responding to it in individual schools.
Yeah, one of the challenges I think we have at the board level, or at least I'll just speak for myself, one of the challenges I have at the board level with these kinds of things then is how do I get an understanding of how comprehensive the implementation is across the district, right? And it's not just with this issue, right? I mean, there are other issues where we have these kind of, as you said, Scott, we've certainly heard before, you know, different schools have different needs, and I believe that. And how do we know from where we sit that those needs are all being adequately met, right? I mean, how do we get a handle on that, right? Because I feel like on some of the SEL stuff historically, I don't really know where we stand now, but on some of the SEL stuff historically, we did have different programs in place. And I didn't know that we had programs in place, effective programs in place in all of them, right? It just, for me anyway, it was always hard to get a handle on that answer, frankly. And I'm not saying we should take the simple solution just to give us a way to get a handle on it. I'm not saying that, but it does present a little bit of challenge and tension as we discuss it, as we try to internalize how successful we're being and where we might need to exercise more influence or devote more resources or something else.
Rob, I appreciate kind of pinpointing that, and I do believe affective education is harder to monitor. It just is, right? It's hard to know. We could have programs in every school, but they might not be effective. And so we could be doing implementation super well, but they're not hitting the mark. And it's hard to measure that. I think we've been pushed by the board and with work by staff. We are doing a better job of understanding how students are doing with their social, emotional development in our district than most. We actually ask the question annually, how are our students doing? So I think that's a measure for us to evaluate going forward. But I also think it is going to be powerful for us to monitor what we see with disproportionality, as you have started to see a week ago. That is going to be telling for us going forward. How well do students feel like they belong? Because if they're in the discipline cycle, they're not likely feeling like they belong. And they're telling us similar things in the connection survey. So I think monitoring those things is going to be critical going forward. And I know that's uncomfortable because it is data that we get once a year. But I think it's going to be important as we make this shift that is really what that's how we analyze the results of our work. It's hard to analyze the actual work. You got to look at, are you getting the results you want? And this work is not going to be overnight. It's not going to be, we're not going to change and become a restorative practice showcase district in 12 months. It's not going to happen. So, but I do think we'll see results will change.
Okay, and I'm going to start asking us to wrap it up, so final comments. Go ahead, Naomi.
Yeah, this is my final comment. Thank you. I think that all of this work is really, really good. I think that we are, taking intentional steps to making large systemic change, and I really appreciate that. I've recommended a podcast to a lot of you, Nice White Parents by the New York Times, which deals with nice white parents trying to make equity decisions in their schools with more multicultural students. Spoiler alert, it didn't go super well. So my question is, how are we ensuring that we are hearing from our marginalized communities as we are trying to make these plans to best support them, both in the planning and in the evaluation?
Naomi, I really appreciate that question. I was in a team meeting yesterday, actually, talking about how we start doing our needs assessment as we start to transition out of this school year, about what families need for next year. In those conversations, we start talking about what are their experiences like. Part of inclusive leadership is not trying to uproot the whole hierarchy of how institutions are founded. It's really about engaging in the process of how are we inclusive in the process of making decision making, and how are they informed? They're informed by the stakeholders that we serve. And so in the past, the good old days of pre-old COVID, right? We did parent academies, we had parent engagement workshops, we had opportunities, we had what we call cafecitos with our family liaisons, where they'd come in and bring in families, and we would just have conversations and have discussions where we could then hear from our families. Now, we're talking about our Latinx community. When we think about the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion, we need to be purposeful and diligent about expanding that. I had the opportunity right before spring break to go and talk to SEAC about equity, diversity, inclusion, and start to hear from their perspective and their voices what are the things that they are needing and trying to understand. And what was great is that, they've got incredible stories and are willing to share those with us. And some of them are recurring themes. Transportation, after sports, or things, and it's really hard. Things that we've heard before, but it's a temperature check and kind of a well-balanced assessment of what are the recurring themes that our families need. As it relates to equity, diversity, and inclusion, I think that it is going to be multiple mechanisms to trying to listen differently and create different mechanisms to do that. So we've got some work to do. We don't have all the answers, but we do have some natural mechanisms to start hearing from our diverse communities. I think, Kristen, you asked about our GSA Spectrum Clubs. It is an opportunity for us to develop more, but one of the things that we want is some sort of district leadership GSA or Spectrum Club. That's not unbeknownst to us. It literally is about time and bandwidth to start to create this work. So we'll get there. I think what we ask of our community right now is continue to give us those ideas, continue to challenge us and ask us questions so that it'll make us better. That's part of the process of being inclusive.
DJ.
Scott, you'd mentioned a couple times about the No Place for Hate, and I was just wondering if, and it doesn't have to be tonight, because you might not have it, but how it's been going to implement it and how well it's working in those communities a little bit. I have heard from other school districts, that have been working on it, so I'd be intrigued to find out how well it's doing and how well it's hitting the mark.
We can get you some feedback. That's on maybe Friday update.
Great. Okay. So I think based on the depth and the length of the discussion this evening, it's clear that this is a topic of interest. And Dr. Lambert, thank you for actually stepping forward and doing the presentation this evening. I think that shows how much it's being taken seriously by our administration. So thanks for presenting and bringing this team in front of us to do the discussion with us. I really appreciate it. Very nice. And thanks, John, for joining us.
It's good to see you all.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
All right. Are we still good? Keep marching forward. Okay. Item 7.2 on the agenda is the 2020-2021 school year update. And I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Lambert.
Hey, thanks again. I know this is the moment you've all been waiting for as we get to this point in the meeting. And I think the thing that's always in question is who's going to go first tonight on our school update. And I thought of creative ways to do it, and all of them sounded kind of silly. So I'm just going to go with Tracy first. They're going to provide tonight's update on the current school year. As you know, you have opportunity after that's over for some Q&A. They have a couple of brief focused topics they'll mention, and then the floor will be open for anything you'd like. So I'm going to turn it over to Tracy.
Thank you, Dr. Lambert, President Febb, members of the board. Real quick, just an update that the Friday before spring break, all of the schools received their student-based budget plans, and so they're going to be working on that allocation. And just want to honor the work of Dave Montoya and the budget design team, who really took the opportunity to get a lot of feedback from principals and from departments about how we could look at student-based budgeting differently. And the allocations went out in a new way this year in terms of the funding model was distributed a little bit differently, with a little bit more money going toward elementary. And those schools, particularly the elementary, were pleased with that allocation and how responsive that budget design team was and how supportive they were of recognizing the need to support our early learners. And so they're going to be working on that. And Brett Parsons and I met with the smaller elementary schools, the ones who are projected to be under 300, to make sure that that new budget design model that was pushed out works for them as well. And so we're going to continue to work through that process and get feedback from those schools since we've made a change to that SBB allocation this year. So that's kind of the big news out in the system for schools, that they're going to be working on those budget plans and be submitting those in the next week. Thank you.
Great.
And I just have a couple of bullet points as well. As you know, I think we were together 2 weeks ago, but really 5 school days and really only 1 or 2 now school days with everybody. So secondary's been spending their time getting ready to have everybody back in. Exciting to say that feedback from the principals this morning is buildings are full. Buildings feel full. And if you talk to students, if you have a chance to get out and ask students what they're feeling, they'll tell you the classrooms feel full, the hallways feel full. And the principals this morning, as I asked them to give me a ballpark for what it felt like in terms of percentages of students, obviously I did that on the spot, and they reported between 80 and 85% is what it felt like. Their attendance at the middle school level for yesterday was 92.2%, which was exactly the same percentage we had on Monday the 8th. So the last Monday we were in school, but with A students and B at home. Our attendance was exactly the same. And our high school attendance yesterday was 88%, down about 2 percentage points from what it was 2 weeks ago on Monday, when half the students were in, half the students were out. So the wondering we had about what percentage would show up, I think there was some nervous energy, and I had heard stories, I think some of you had as well, of AP classes where 4 students were coming when only half the students were there. That's not what materialized yesterday and today, and knock on wood, that continues, that we see students showing up. We also had, if you recall, we've given parents an opportunity to talk to principals and go on a remote learning track, if you will. Already in the first 2 days of being back, we've had students that asked to be remote learning that have showed up in person. So we'll continue to monitor that and see how that lays out. The second thing I wanted to share is we just started 4th quarter, but really thinking about how do we culminate the year. And there are some things that we historically do at the secondary to culminate the year, one of which is 5th grade to 6th grade transition, feeling like that's pretty important, pretty critical. We're not ready yet this year to say we're going to do 6th grade visitations and bring all the 5th graders to the 6th grade schools, given we just added all the students. But the middle schools are knee deep right now in planning how they can virtually get students excited about moving to the middle school. And then we have, at the high school level, we have other things like prom is a good example, where last year was off the table. Working closely with the health department right now, looking like we're going to be able to do some kind of prom, at least a senior prom, likely be outside, likely on a football field, possibly with shifts. We haven't landed there yet, but that kind of planning is in place. And culminating like 8th grade celebration to end the year. Graduation we talked a little bit about 2 weeks ago. I told you we'd have landed the plane. We have not quite landed the plane. We've got another meeting with the health department Thursday. But it's looking like we'll have 2 of our smaller programs that will be inside on Wednesday. I can't remember the date, but we'll have 2 Wednesday, 2 Thursday, 2 Friday, 2 Saturday is what it's looking like. And the Thursday, Friday, Saturday graduations all will be at French Field. And so that's what it's looking like it'll land. We haven't been able to get enough attendance to do, say, the IB convocation inside. So that looks like it'll be at French Field again like it was last year. And it's looking like PCA will also be a little bit too big to be inside. And so they'd like to be out on the football field too. That allows them to have a few more guests as well. So still working out those details, but that culminating, how do you kind of end a school year where we didn't get to do any of that last year. This year we have some of that in planning and good momentum around those kind of celebrations. That's the update for tonight.
So Scott, I assume you're working out the weather as you plan outdoors. I know Tessa helps quite a bit on that front, so if you just work nicely with
I heard the snow for the rest of the year came down a week ago or so, so I think we're good to know. I mean, that's a challenge for us, Christoph. No doubt outside the weather could be a challenge. In May, we're going to do similar to what we did last year, 9-1. And we'll have to have some contingency plans, which we're still working. But yeah, weather we can't control quite like we can when we're inside. Although if some of you remember my first year in this job, we almost had graduation canceled because of snow, even at Moby that year, because it broke some trees, and so it's hard to say. But hopefully it'll be nice. Cross your fingers. We're due for some good weather then.
Great. And honestly, I've been excited and thinking hard about March 22nd and opening all the schools to students. I was pretty excited and anxious to hear how that was going. So thanks to the three of you for the work and pulling that off. So with that, I'll open it up to board questions if there are any. Go ahead, DJ.
Scott, do you know about a percentage or how many students are doing the remote? You said there's quite a few that showed up, but do we have numbers? How many are still doing it?
At each school it's a little different. I'm trying to think what I saw in the notes today. Like Rocky has 40 that have formally signed up. Fossil Ridge is well over that. I can't remember off the top of my head what their numbers are. I think that'll land for us more officially in another week or so. We'll know who is destined to stay in that arena and who's not. But it was different who formally had the conversation and who did not, right? So so we have to monitor a little bit, and we're still super early, but I have to just admit I did not expect that I would get the feedback that the participation in classrooms felt as full as they did. I anticipated we would have some pockets where, large groups would say, we're not going, we're going to still stay remote, and that doesn't seem to be where the energy was. It seemed like lots of excitement to be back in school, and I think that may help us kind of bridge that and continue to bring kids back, but we'll keep monitoring.
I can confirm that the drop-off lanes are quite busy.
Me too.
Quite more full.
I had drop-off yesterday for my daughter at Preston the first day back, and yeah, we were waiting for quite a while, but I know they're working hard monitoring that too, and I can just attest just in that communication that Amy's been pretty transparent in saying we'll monitor and watch, and we may have to have some iterative changes that go on as we move forward. But I know they're working on it, and drop-off pickup was a touchy subject when we opened elementaries. And if you talk to the elementaries, they'd say a couple of weeks, and then things kind of level off. People figure it out, and we'll see the same thing at secondary likely.
Well, my second question kind of goes off that is the buses situation. I was a little taken back by the article that was in the Colorado one that our numbers were not going to be able to increase at all. What's the situation there, or are we not going to see that at all this last quarter to be able to go get a little bit more students on board?
Yeah, we have seen added students almost daily. In fact, I just got an email just before I stepped into the board meeting tonight from Jake saying they just added 2 more, one Blevin student and one Rocky student. So they're still working with the schools, trying to figure it out. That's a hard one also because as it is at the beginning of a school year, you don't often know how many people are actually going to get on the bus. We're in that mode right now of trying to figure out how many people that we've assigned are actually going to get on. What seats do we have open? I just asked the principals again this morning to pay attention to what buses look like they're coming with open seats. And we'll continue to fill up the seats we have available. And we're, I think, close to 40 drivers short right now. So, it is a pickle for us. And we talked today in our meeting about work we can help do. I think all of us, anyone listening, can help think about bus drivers now, but also for the fall. because it's going to be hard to get that all replaced between now and then. So I know Jake and his team are working hard to get people on.
Thank you.
Did the 3-foot, the new guidance from the CDC alter anything with regards to the busing?
It didn't impact busing as far as the procedures going right now, no.
Okay, I was wondering about that during these. Other questions? Go ahead, Naomi.
Yeah, so I have a little bit of extra time on my hands. So I was actually able to visit all of the comprehensive high schools before spring break. And it was a very different story at every school. This is definitely one of those, every school is individual. When I was at Fossil, Julie said her numbers of students who weren't going to return was close to 20%. Whereas when I was at Rocky, Craig shared that he thought it was closer to 5%. So every school had kind of a different family situation that they were working with. But while I was at the schools, I did want to share that when I went to Rocky, I saw two things that I thought were really amazing, and there was one concern that was shared. Yes, so DJ's daughter was there. Amazing. Also, the choir was out in the commons all over the rocks and just spread out as far as they could be so that they could sing together, still in their masks. And you would be amazed at how well the acoustics worked. Mm-hmm. It was really nice to be able to walk by and listen to their lovely singing. The other thing that I saw was in an integrated math class. And these students were working to build bridges with straws and some other little handheld devices that would hold a certain amount of weight. But before they did that, they learned all about geometry. They learned about magic triangles. They learned about squares. They built a triangle and they built a square and they saw which one was stronger. So the inquiry learning, the hands-on learning, the innovative teaching practices are still happening in our buildings. Just getting kids to school is only one piece of the picture. But then once we're getting them there, people are figuring out how to make sure that we're providing authentic and enriching education to the students. It is really a very beautiful thing to see. I also visited a very small tech room. And this is, again, one of those where there's not a lot of really great alternatives, and the teacher in the room is doing his best to figure out how to support all of the students, because it was a very small, narrow room without any windows. And since they have computers, they're all kind of sitting right next to each other. So they're trying to put up clear shower curtains, and they've got a box fan with a HEPA filter on it to help to circulate the air. So they're trying their best to be as creative as possible. And there were also some concerns about when they went into phase 4, what that would look like.
Great, thank you. Other questions or comments? Okay, thank you for the update this evening. Okay, item 7.3 is board revisions to policies BSR 4.0, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, and 4.4. And this is a first reading. And I see your name on it, Dr. Lambert, but I was just going to quickly put out there, I don't quite know how long we'll give this. It's one of the first times we're really kind of reviewing a board policy for a while and seeing this, but so I want to give it enough time that we can talk through it, but also remembering that we can do a second reading before we bring it to action. So we'll just see how that goes. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Lambert.
Hey, thank you very much, President Febb. Legal and Policy Council has prepared draft revisions to board superintendent policies for discussion. As President Febb said, this is the first reading, and revisions of the policy will be placed in front of the board for approval at a future meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to our Legal and Policy Council. This is Autumn Aspen, and she's prepared to do the readings and take questions from you. Autumn, it's all yours.
Good
can go through a discussion probably of each policy just to make sure we can get that discussion for one policy before moving on to the next. So we can start with BSR 4.0, which is the General Board Superintendent Relationship Policy. And this policy basically states that the board's sole official connection to the operational organization, its management and staff, its achievements and conduct will be through the superintendent. And with this policy, I'm proposing a change here, which is adding that first paragraph, which you see in red. And this language basically states the kind of just more general high-level goals for the relationship between the superintendent and the board, and also discusses the distinction between the different roles that the board and the superintendent have. I don't know if you've all read through it, if you want me to read through the changes as we go through, or just kind of open it up for discussion.
I don't think you need to read it out loud, actually. I think I'll open it up for discussion. And I know, oh, is that a hand? Okay. Looks good to Nate. Okay. I know, thanks. Rob, did you want to make any comments on this one? Okay. Are there any comments on this one? Looks good, thumbs up. Okay, so this one could apparently come back as an action item then. Very good. I'll let you proceed.
Okay, well that makes it easy for that one. The next one, Lauren, is 4.1, which is on unity of control. This policy discusses that only directives of a quorum of the board are binding on the superintendent. And with this policy, there's 3 proposed changes for the board's consideration and discussion. The first change discusses that documents that are approved by official board action will not be amended by the superintendent or district staff without further board action. The intent for this change is basically directed at contracts and documents like that, where once the board approves a contract, for example, any amendment to that contract would have to come before the board again without any revisions by staff, unless the board authorizes staff to make further amendments to that contract. And the next change is in number 3, which that section states that if board members ask for information from the superintendent could refuse those requests if the request would create a lot of amount of staff time or funds, or if it's disruptive. And here the proposed change, based on some feedback from the board discussion at the retreat, would be to add a sentence there that says if the superintendent does refuse that request, that they inform the board member of the reason why. And then there's also a sentence after that that states that the board could then direct the superintendent to fulfill that request if there's a majority of the board who would like that information. And then the third change for this policy is an addition of number 4, which states that nothing in this policy is intended to limit any board member's right to request and receive school records under CRS 22-32-103. And that statute states that each school director shall have access to all school records at all times. So this addition doesn't really add or change any rights that school board members have. It just is more of there for a reminder or to ensure that nothing in this policy is intended to restrict that ability that's in statute.
Okay, thank you. Questions, comments? DJ?
I'm not a lawyer, and I don't play one on TV. And I'm also, English would not be my best subject. So I have this question about the very first sentence here about only directives of a quorum should be from a quorum of the board, because it just didn't make sense to me the way that part was written. First part. Second part is, does the part in red, which I liked, but with your explanation, the thing that just kind of went off in my head was the situation we had last year when we were trying to figure out money in our budget, where we approved a contract, but it wasn't filled at the time because we were putting it off to figure out our money situation, and then money was moved around. So to me, I would take it that would still need to come back to the board with what was written here. But with your explanation, now I'm thinking maybe it doesn't. And so I guess I just want clarification on a process. You know, if we approve something, it's not done, or it's moved to a later time, how does that fulfill into that category?
I think that's a good question. There could be some potential changes to that first sentence to address that if needed, but I think part of it would be if the board makes a decision and if it's more just a timing issue of if it's delayed, but the decision actually doesn't change, it's not amended, then I think this language would still hold for that.
Okay.
It would more be if there's a decision by the board and then there's something that needs to change with that, they would have to come back before the board for that amendment.
Okay.
You didn't address whether it should be of or from.
Any other thoughts on that one?
Okay.
Yeah. I just, a quorum is, yeah, because a quorum is, you got enough people there to make it official. Yeah, and so only directors, yeah, so.
I think by would work if that change makes sense.
Yeah.
We'll vote on that before. All right. Other questions or comments on this one?
No, I'll just say I appreciate very much the way you took the input from the retreat on the first part's fine too, but particularly on the 3 and 4 there and how you threaded that needle. So thank you.
Okay, I had one question, comment about number 4 based on what had caused trouble in the past. And you actually said we're already covered by statute. What I think was not covered was prompt and unaltered. And I was wondering if there was a way, if it makes sense to, add that. It seems obvious, but I think what board members were looking for was reasonably quickly receiving materials. And what's that?
A timely manner?
A timely manner, and without need for edits or commentary, any of the things that might slow it down from being brought forward. I think that's what, okay, go ahead, Carolyn.
And I think that what goes along with that is I asked for a document, and when I got it, it was redacted, which really shocked me. So what about a superintendent or taking it upon themselves to redact things in a document?
So maybe in unaltered or pure, no need for commentary, something that would address that. And I just throw that out there and see what others say.
I could look at some language like that. I think there may be some reasons where redactions would be appropriate, or maybe the document was redacted for another reason, but I can look to see if that could be addressed. I think what also could go in that number 4 is potentially that language of having the documents provided in a timely manner or prompt, unless there's a reason why it couldn't be, and then maybe there's just an explanation from the superintendent of why the document couldn't be provided in a reasonably quick time frame, if that makes sense.
Okay, yep, that would probably hit it. So, go ahead, Naomi.
Yeah, in number 3, the last sentence, a decision by a majority of a quorum of the board, is it a majority of a quorum, or is it a majority or a quorum?
It's a majority of a quorum. So as long as there's a quorum present of the board, then it's a majority of that quorum.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll have you review that, but if it's quick and easy, we could bring it as an action. We'll kind of see where that lands. So, okay. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, and the next one is BSR 4.2, and that's accountability of the superintendent. This policy basically states that the superintendent is vested with the full authority over and accountability for management and staff, and that the board shall not give directions or instructions to persons who report directly or indirectly to the superintendent, except for the district's legal and policy council. And with this policy, there's one proposed addition, and it's a new subsection A, and that change discusses that the superintendent could direct requests for information made by board members to members of the superintendent's cabinet, and then they could respond directly to board members as long as the superintendent is properly notified or copied on those responses.
Okay, go ahead, Nate, and then Rob.
I just happen to think, wondered whether it would be helpful to add appropriate members of the superintendent's cabinet or other staff, because it might be directed to someone other than a cabinet member. But it's fine with me that it comes back through a cabinet member.
Yeah, I had suggested that also, that we add other relevant staff here. It's at the direction of the superintendent anyway, so I don't see why that should be a problem. And we have examples right now where that's happening, so I would hate to have it so the superintendent says the cabinet member talks to the director has to talk to the cabinet member has, I mean, it's just nuts.
It's a well-run system there, Rob.
Yeah, it's a system, all right.
I think an example of that could be, we had a member here tonight who is a director but not a cabinet member, but he's talking about a really important topic to all of us, and there may be times for Q&A in that area. So he would seem to me to be a relevant example to what you're requesting, like what Nate's saying too.
I think that if I can make some changes to that language then to include, I don't know if it'd be other relevant staff or appropriate district leadership or something to that effect to make it a little bit more comprehensive.
Anything else on 4.2? Okay.
Okay, moving on to 4.3, which is nature and delegation to the superintendent. This policy just has one proposed change, and it states that in some circumstances as determined by the superintendent, it may be in the best interest of district staff and students for the superintendent to coordinate with the board on decisions that would generally be delegated to the superintendent as organizational means. This is in the section discussing the executive limitations and which decisions are made by the board versus the superintendent. So this provides a little bit more, not really flexibility, but just kind of solidifying that option there that the superintendent could coordinate with the board on some of those decisions that would generally be means decisions.
DJ, or Nate, I'm sorry. I looked at Nate and called DJ, so.
Therein lies the rub that I think is the issue. I'd like it to be couched in a more collaborative rather than tension. It seems to me it kind of assumes that there's a tension there, and there may be, but I would like it to be something like, in some circumstances, as determined by the superintendent in consultation with the board, it may be in the best interest, or something like that. I mean, because I think on big decisions, even those that are means decisions, it's in the best interest of the district to make sure that everyone's on the same page, even though the superintendent is responsible for the means. So this to me seems like it sets up a tension that I would rather have it be more of a collaborative relationship.
I appreciate that comment, and I think this language, it was a little bit of a struggle to just craft what the actual outcome that was desired would be in actual language for policy. Discussing if it is in consultation with the board, just the piece there is a little difficult to word, because then it would potentially require a board to vote to allow it to happen, because it's the board acting as a whole entity, not individual board members. So trying to figure out a way to craft that language where the superintendent could coordinate with the board without having more hurdles and steps in the way to actually get that teamwork working. I think another piece there is, I think that was it for that piece.
Carolyn? And then Rob?
I can see there's been a couple of times when there were decisions that were made that were probably were going to be made by the superintendent, but in the end weren't. And one of them was when they were contemplating closing schools, and the board actually did take a vote, it's my understanding, because they thought it was important enough that they should be making that decision because they felt accountable to the voters. And I can think of one other time since I've been on the board where there was some tension about whether the superintendent would make a decision or whether the board would. And I think we ended up deferring back to the superintendent, but that was on whether or not we would take Medicaid. So there are times when there are important decisions, I think, that are being made, and especially like something like taking Medicaid because it was a large dollar amount, that the board felt like maybe they should have some input. So I guess what I'm getting at is how can we get some language that represents that acknowledges that there's going to be times where there are going to be important decisions that the board might want to give input on. And I think that's what we're struggling with here, right?
Right. I think one option would potentially be to look at the executive limitations, and if there's some language to add in there where if the board would like the option to take some decisions and make those decisions themselves, and that could be in the executive limitations policy.
Rob?
I guess I would say that if we were to take that approach, that requires multiple votes too, right? It requires a vote to add it to the executive limitations, and then it requires a vote to actually decide on whatever it is, closing schools or whatever it is, right? So I'm not sure that really changes anything in terms of how onerous, if you want to call it, the process might be. I actually like the language in consultation with the board. I think there are two things about that. One of them is it doesn't say that the board makes the consultation. To me, does not necessarily imply that we have to take a vote on something, right? I mean, I remember, for example, when we talked about the Medicaid thing, we talked about it extensively in dinner sessions for the most part, and I felt like, you know, whether or not I agreed with the ultimate decision, I felt like there was consultation going on there, right? And so people were getting a vibe, and if somebody wanted to take it to a vote, we could have done that, but we didn't do that, okay? So I think consultation is actually a good word there to help with that. And yeah, so enough said. That's my.
Nate?
I'm wondering if it might be best just to eliminate the clause as determined by the superintendent, because I think the rest of it implies that, you know, there's a decision made among the superintendent and the board about whether that consultation would take place, knowing that there are decisions that would be generally delegated to the superintendent.
Could I actually think that might work. Another thing, I was actually roughly okay with as determined by the superintendent, because the superintendent still is beholden to the board. But given what Rob was saying, I was wondering if rather than in consultation, which I still think, how do you consult with the board? It's hard to do. But if it was in consideration of the board, it might, you know, it explicitly states that the superintendent is doing it while reflecting on what the board's thinking. But after hearing Nate, I would also consider just removing that, and it probably gets closer. It's less explicit, which I think is the concern of board members. Go ahead, Nate.
Well, I think regardless of what you call it, the Medicaid decision was, to me, a good example. We did have consultation between the superintendent and the board, you know, in a series of meetings about what we were going to do, what the superintendent was going to do, and the board had the option of directing the superintendent. But I think it worked in the end. So.
Sorry, Todd.
I just want to make sure I'm processing what the suggestion was. It's to take out as determined by the superintendent. So we're essentially using the verb coordinate as opposed to consulting, right? We're just saying that the groups are going to coordinate together. Is that what you're promoting there? Or in consultation?
I think the only concern with that is if you take out the as determined by the superintendent, it makes it a little less clear and I think a little bit more vague of what that exactly means in which circumstances, because then it does have the word may in there, but it just may not be clear of who initiates that and then it may take away from the superintendent's ability to make decisions on those means, because it won't be clear of who makes those decisions all the time or who could make those decisions.
So one thing I'm trying to process as quickly as I can, I think the objective of the language should be to help us all work together as best we can. And I'm trying to think about how this, it can't be absolute. I think there are times where we are in tension, and maybe that's what this is trying to acknowledge, and maybe that in itself helps. But I'm struggling to determine whether one form of this or the other would do better to have, I think Medicaid is a good example. It became obvious that there was a lot of discussion among board members. It certainly would behoove the superintendent to consider that and to consult at that moment, and it may happen with or without. So I'm just speaking out loud, thinking off the top of my head. Go ahead. Okay, Rob and then Todd.
No, go ahead.
No, I think that based on what Autumn is saying, by using consultation and not taking that out, you get both needs met.
Use consultation.
Well, I think if your goal is that, like Autumn is saying, you want to make sure the superintendent retains that position to make those calls, and at the same time recognizing the value of consultation, partnership, good discussion to lead to a good decision. I think keeping everything there and doing in consultation gets to both of those. At least it seems like to me.
So how about we put it back, you reflect on it. It sounds like we're kind of landing on some form of consultation, and we'll see where that goes. So great discussion. I think that's why we're doing this tonight. So, okay.
Okay.
Back to you.
Anything else on that policy, or moving on to the next one? Okay. BSR 4.4 is on monitoring district superintendent performance. There's one proposed change here, and the intent was to clarify what is meant by reasonable and prudent person. I think there was some discussion at the retreat that just wasn't entirely clear, and I attempted to make it a little clearer, but maybe made it a little bit less clear even. So as I was reading through this, it seemed to me that the standard already implies an objective standard for determining whether the superintendent is reasonably interpreting the board's policies. So that was the reason for adding that sentence about it being an objective standard instead of a subjective interpretation. And I'd welcome any comments and feedback on this part.
Let's go with Rob first and see where this leads. So go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I may be challenged in terms of legal, like DJ said, I'm not a lawyer and I don't play one on TV. I did go to one semester of law school, for what that's worth. Not much, but the challenge I have is when I think about the words objective and subjective, right? Objective to me is 2 + 2 = 4, right? I mean, that's an objective fact, right? When I think about, is the superintendent in compliance with, in compliance with a standard or executing on something, and we ask, is that reasonable? Is that a reasonable interpretation? Somebody's got to make a judgment about whether it's reasonable or not. There's no third party, there's no book you can go to say this is reasonable or this is not reasonable. So who makes that judgment call? A majority of the board makes that judgment call. It's in our language when we talk about monitoring reports. I move that the superintendent has made a reasonable interpretation, and there's another clause to it. I forget what it is, but and there's an option that says the superintendent hasn't done a reasonable thing. And we don't choose that option. At least we never have when I've been on the board, but it's there, as a possibility. Similarly, since this section talks about performance, I think, if in the broader sense of the superintendent, it's a judgment call of the board as a whole whether the superintendent is performing reasonably or not, right? So I guess when somebody has to make a judgment call, that, to me, in a layperson's suit, is not objective in some sort of hard fact kind of way, right? It's a judgment call, right? Which to me is inherently subjective. And so Why am I going through all this? I'm going through all this because I think that claiming that it's objective somehow feels to me misleading, for lack of a better word, right? Yeah, well, no, seriously, and I think that's a source of some tension, actually, or can be a source of some tension, right? So I don't know, and I know from my limited law, from watching Law and Order or whatever, that there is this thing called the reasonable person standard, right? But who interprets what the reasonable person? The judge, I think, in those circumstances, gives some guidance about what's reasonable, right? In this case, there's nobody else but the board. So that's my concern with the addition that you've made here. I feel like it's made it more confusing.
I'm actually fine with that. I think the changes without the last sentence are pretty clear. It actually says the board is the last arbiter, and it also says it's the reasonable person standard. So, but it clearly states that the board is the arbiter in this situation, and I think that's as objective or subjective as you're ever going to get. I actually think it does confuse things to add that last sentence. I would be fine without it. So, Nate?
I agree. I think the last sentence could be eliminated, or the new sentence could be eliminated. And if we really wanted to go whole hog, we could put in there, the board will always judge with the reasonable person standard situated as is she or he, because that's part of the reasonable person standard. Situated as is she. No, I think it's fine without.
Okay. Thank goodness. Go ahead, Rob.
So I'm I don't know about that, but I'm good. I'm fine. So if we eliminate the sentence, I'm good with that. Even though it still says the reasonable person standard. I do have a sort of a broader question here, which is not really, I don't think, a question. I mean, you can talk to it, Autumn. I'm not saying you shouldn't or you can't. I just think it's a broader question than a legal question. And that is, as I think about what a superintendent does or doesn't do, decisions that he or she makes, right? I think about, is what that person doing in the best interests of the district, in the best interests of the student, right? Of the students and the staff and the district as a whole, right? And I struggle with wording like this, right, in that context, right? Because as a board member, when I make a judgment call about, like I said, whether a good thing is going on, I think about what does that mean for the district, right? And I don't know whether that can or should be, that kind of value statement can or should be reflected in these policies, but I think it's the reality of how at least I look at my job as a board member. What's going on here, and is it the right thing for the students in the district? I'm repeating myself, sorry.
Nate?
I think in this case we could say that reasonableness is a substitute for what's in the best interests of the district. Because if it's not in the best interests of the district, then I think we'd say it's unreasonable. So.
Okay, so I think you heard eliminate the last sentence. Other changes are good, or pretty good. I actually think that language is pretty real and represents quite well what we're doing. So, okay. And that's the last one we had any changes on, right?
Yes, the last one is just 4.5 on superintendent compensation. I think there wasn't any discussion at the retreat about making any changes there, so I didn't make any changes. If there's some discussion, we can have that, or if there's no changes needed, then we don't need to discuss that one.
Okay, so then should we try to bring all these policies back on consent or as an action? Or do you want to do another reading one more time?
Sorry, I think we can, I think based on what we've heard here, and I think what we've agreed to, we should bring them back on consent, and if somebody wants to pull it, we can pull it, but I don't see,
Okay.
that's my feeling.
Okay, let's try that. I think that's a fair, we're pretty close, it seems like. So let's try consent, and as Rob said, we'll put them if we need to. So, okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Autumn, I appreciate it.
Yeah, nice work. Okay, so finally that brings us to item 7.4, and that's the next update on the superintendent evaluation instrument. And DJ and Carolyn, I'm turning that over to you. So,
all right, I'll start off with we had put two things in the packet, and the first one was the draft questions, and the questions that we copied and kind of changed the order a little bit of how the questions and the artifact evidence sheet kind of goes together. And so we thought we would just, because there's a lot going on, we thought we would just try to focus on the questions and are these the right kind of questions that we should be asking, but keeping in mind the other timeline with the 5 parts is still what we're looking at. We're still looking at doing these questions which are out there, and then having the superintendent's goals, evidence of performance, and feedback on performance, and then the culmination of all of that put together for the final evaluation summary. I think we just kind of wanted to open it up about these questions, and Rob had sent some questions about the questions to us, which I thought were really good. And one of the things, the overall part of his question, I think is something that we need to think about and address as I pull up his questions here, is, do we want to be more direct with the questions that we are asking and evaluating, or do we want these, this, small batch of questions to kind of be a little bit more broad, and we can pull in stuff that we want to into this part of the evaluation? Carolyn, do you have something to add?
So when we were looking at the different evaluation documents that different districts were using, one of them that we were really interested in, both of us separately pulled up the Oregon document, which was 9 questions, each one receiving an evaluation mark of 1 to 5, I believe. And that one seemed like a big improvement on what we were doing because they were just the 9 areas of evaluation. However, other school districts nearby to us, like Weld County, use like 4 questions, or almost like prompts, to get board members to think about how has the superintendent been doing in the past year. And their reasoning, or the reason they liked that, is it gave each board member time to expand on how they thought the superintendent was doing. And I think that kind of the questions that Rob was asking today kind of go in that direction. There are 5 questions, I believe, right, Rob? 5. Yep. That kind of encompass like, how is the superintendent doing? And then it would be up to the board in doing the evaluation to discuss what's been going on in the past year and decide if the superintendent has met or not met the I don't know if you want to call them goals, or has been able to accomplish the things in the question, like had the superintendent improved on-time graduation, yes or no, and maybe the board would talk about it and then put into the evaluation that they didn't maybe think the superintendent had met it because on-time graduation had gone down, but also gave the board that more open kind of concept, give the board, I think, an opportunity to explain why. Whereas for me, the Oregon one, what I kind of liked about it, it pointed you towards the documents that you would use and the data you would use to measure whether or not the superintendent had accomplished the goals. So on one hand, I like the open concept of just asking those 5 broad questions, but I think the devil is in making sure that when you're doing the evaluation, that you're using data and not subjectivity, like I like the superintendent and I don't want to say anything, bad, so I'm going to give her a passing grade on this because, I think she's tried hard. Whereas if we look at the data, maybe we would see that no, on-time graduation has not worked, or we haven't closed the gaps, or maybe even on some of the things that we've really succeeded in, we don't even call those out as good as we should, or we don't acknowledge them like we should. So I think that's the conundrum we're in. Do we take and have something that's more structured, or do we want something that's less structured? And I think the other thing we have to think about is how does this survive this board, and how does this get handed over to the next board? Like, is it going to be successful?
Okay, those are fantastic questions, and I know Rob is just begging to get in, and then Kristen, so I'll open it up to discussion. So
I'm calm.
He's calmly ready to engage here. So
yeah, no. So I guess my feeling. So the kind of questions. I mean, I don't know who's seen this thing. I mean, I know Todd and we have, but I mean, the kind of questions that I'm talking about here, I'll just give a couple of examples of them. Is the superintendent demonstrating sufficient and the right leadership and vision for the moment in which the district finds itself, in the eyes of the board, in the eyes of the staff, in the eyes of the community? Is the superintendent running the operational and financial sides of the district in the best short-term and long-term interests of the students, it says here, but maybe it should be of the students and staff. I mean, I'm not saying these are perfect questions, but I can tell you that the reason I sort of came to these general questions is, and I'll acknowledge that Christoph and I sort of cooked up the last superintendent evaluation document by basically borrowing it from Washington State. And so anyway, so the reason I came to this conclusion is because I found myself, particularly as we went through various evaluation cycles, I think of questions like these, and I think, okay, so here's a thing that I want to bring up. It went well, or it didn't go well, or whatever. How do I fit that into this Washington document, right? Where in there does it fit, right? The Washington document, and I'll get to the Oregon one in a second, but the Washington document did provide some prompts, caused me to think about some things differently, so that was good. I mean, but there were things that I just knew were happening or weren't happening, and I wanted to say something about them, and I had to figure out where to put them. And that just seemed not helpful to the conversation that I think really needs to, my experience both in business, frankly, and on the board, having worked here for 5 years or so, is it's the conversation that's important to really getting the performance evaluation to be effective, right? And it has to be authentic, and we have to have the courage to say things that aren't going well, and the foresight, and the foresight is maybe the wrong word, but the presence of mind to also call out the things that are going well. But at some level, that's on us, whatever document we're using, right? Either we're going to do that or we're not. We can sugarcoat things with any document or any set of questions. So anyway, I think the Oregon document is better than the Washington document because it's simpler. But I think it still suffers from the same problem, quote unquote, which is that it tries to itemize things. There's a big long list of stuff, right? And I'm still going to be wondering, where do I fit in, the thing that I think is most important given where the circumstances the district finds itself in. So I just tried to come up with broader questions that cover all areas of the district that I think are important, and I don't say that I haven't missed one, and I agree 100% that we need to pair that with data, and some of the stuff that you guys have called out specifically. You know, some of the 1.0 results, perhaps some of the UIP stuff, feedback surveys, some of those kind of things, absolutely ought to be part of it, in my view, ought to be part of this evaluation process, right? But I think we can find those data, I think we can associate those data and any other artifacts with these kind of simple questions rather than the more complicated multi-part thing that, at least that I view the Oregon standards to be. So I would say great on the timeline, great on the let's get clearer on the document, or sorry, the evidence. But let's ask the questions in a way that really allows us to have the conversation and not get wrapped around the axle of a document. That's my view.
Okay, looks like DJ wants to respond before you, or do you want to jump in quickly?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Because I don't want to come across necessarily defending it completely, because I'm open to coming up with something. But the part that drew me to this one was the fact that it wasn't as scripted. It was so like, standard one is visionary district leadership is really the big umbrella. And so your first question to me would go perfectly right in there. And so the thing I liked about this one was that each individual ways that we interpret that big umbrella, and if we needed ideas, there's descriptors and then there's artifacts that we could look at. But what is it in us that we see in these 8 standards? And that's what drew me to this one, is that gave us the flexibility to have our own voice in all of these. And then as one part of the 5 things, because I think that's important to be able to get out there. And so that's what drew me. Not to say that those, the questions you have, I like. So, I mean, I think they could work in there.
Okay, Kristen? Oh, okay, Kristen. Carolyn.
I just want to make talk about one more thing that's really important about the Oregon one. Is an important part of it is that the superintendent receives it at least a week beforehand, and she or he fills out their own self-evaluation and sends it to the board before the board does their evaluation. So it really encourages also the superintendent to think about how they are doing. So I think that that's nice because you get that feedback, and that helps you think about also what has the superintendent done. This is a chance for the superintendent to explain what they've done and how they feel like they have succeeded, or even for the superintendent to admit the area where they think they need to work. I did like that part of it too. That invites the superintendent to be part of the evaluation process. And I don't think we've had that really, I think we've not really had that robust kind of way to do that beforehand. So that's one other thing I did like about it, so.
Yeah, and I really like the idea of a self-evaluation followed by an evaluation from the board. I think that helps tremendously. One of the things that I'd like to see, and I liked the standard one, the visionary district leadership, that broad view, but I think what we need is a what and a how. Just simply speaking, what happened? The gap was, the graduation gap was decreased by 1.2%. Then the how. How did that work? Was it through collaborative planning? Was it through, a demand from, so then you're talking about how that happened. Was there, working together? Was there a feeling of everybody was in this together? Or was this sort of just a top-down demand that it was going to happen? And is that going to be able to work continuously? Do we think that's the way to go for that? Yes, we may have seen something, happen, some movement, but is that the way we want to see the movement? So it gives us an ability to see the data, but also then talk about the data of how did that happen, and can we see changes on that? So that's something that I would like to see, is including that data and then the how on that.
Okay, not to burst your bubble, but because the other process, the other thing that I've kept in mind quite a bit is how do we make it manageable? And manageable for us, and also manageable for the superintendent and the other data points that we want to bring in. I think that would tell a great story, and I think that could be interesting if maybe we could pull that, we might be able to pull that into their personal goal, and then they explain how it will happen and we can get that. I don't see, I guess I want to bring us back into, for tonight, we're focused on, the question part. So if you're seeing that to be part of the questions, I think it's too consuming. So that would just be my first reaction. I'm willing to hear ideas.
Rob? So I agree with the idea of a self-evaluation document. And I think that doesn't necessarily imply the Oregon standards. You can apply that in the context of the questions that I posed as well. In addition to my concern that, or I'll put it in a positive way, in addition to as I said earlier, I think the questions that I posed or ones like them are more open-ended and allow a broader set of issues and concerns to be more clearly, and praises, frankly, to be brought more clearly to the surface than the Oregon question structure, if you want to call it that. I think also the other thing I want to say about the Oregon piece is that it feels process-oriented. The descriptors, for example, under visionary district leadership, I'm not going to read them all off, but the first few words in each of the 3 bullets are leads a collaborative process, leads the diverse stakeholder involvement, implements a continuous improvement plan, right? Where is got results in that? Maybe you can sort of see it under continuous improvement plan or, implements an improvement plan. I guess it's not an improvement plan if things haven't improved. I don't know. But, and I think you can see, I could give examples elsewhere in this document of things where it talks about the superintendent puts in place structures, which is an important part of the job. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's not important, right? But I am saying results are also important, right? And that gets to the whole data question we were talking about. So again, so that would be my other area of the concern. So I don't know how we're going to structure this conversation here, but I would propose substitution.
I'm liking the conversation. I want to make sure I get Naomi and Nate involved as well, to the extent that you go ahead.
So I like the Oregon one. It seems though that if we were to maybe with our forces combined use some of the questions, and then the thing I really like about the Oregon one is the descriptors linked with the artifacts. I like that the superintendent will get this evaluation in August so that he or she will have the opportunity to collect those artifacts so that it is an authentic evaluation as we're moving through. Whether we have 8 standards that are more broad or 5 specific questions, I like the questions. I'm wondering how we might be able to do some kind of combination here with the artifacts and the 1 through 4 and because each one of the 1 through 4s also has a section for comments. Mm-hmm. So maybe we can steal that part and the artifact part and then use some of the more broad questions.
Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of like the Deion Sanders approach. Do you want to play offense or defense? Both. So I think we can use both in some way that doesn't make it too unwieldy.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was saying, and I think that gets to the how that I was talking about. So the what is already what we, it's the rating, and then it's the descriptors and the artifacts. That's the what. And then that gets to the how when we're talking about the comments of, like what we've seen, with the collaborative learning or the, whatever it might be. But it gets to the how, which is, I think, something that needs to be seen too.
Absolutely.
I like that.
Okay, maybe, Rob, let me jump in for just a second, and then I'll turn it back over to you. So, I actually was coming somewhere where you were, Naomi, which is some blend. I've got to tell you, going into this, where Rob was ending up with his questions was closer to what I would like to see happen. I've noticed in leading us through these evaluation things, definitely the Washington was cumbersome, and I see even the Oregon one heading that way. So if the language and what are they called, the parameters or the metrics line up nicely, and I can read the language and it doesn't get in the way of this discussion, then I'm good. And I felt like some of Rob's language was closer to what I feel like we want to. And what I've felt like is the quicker we got the superintendent and the board discussing the comments and getting to the meat of the discussion, the better it was. The more time we all spent trying to decipher the language and line stuff up and see if they'd done this, that, or the other that didn't have anything to do with us, the worse. We were getting to the point where we were just running through these check marks and they were completely random. And then there was some of the behavior that Carolyn worries about, and it was all over the map. So feeling-wise, I prefer the 5 questions, but I think there's some real value in the Oregon one that we could try to keep. And I'm wondering if we could edit that language. And then I also have the question of how we're going to land the ship. So, whether the two of you are going to feel comfortable leaving tonight, doing the next reading whenever the next, in the next meeting or something, and, how we're going to do that.
So DJ and I did talk about this today after we received Rob's email with the questions, and we both said we could live with that, that would be great. And then I think the only concerns we had were the ones that we said is like, so how do we marry up the artifacts to that,
Sorry, the artifacts, that was the
And
word.
so, and then like I said, my concern also is that, handing this over to different board members, we want to make sure it's something that can kind of survive this board. I mean, they can always choose what they want, but when they come in, they're going to have to use what they have. So I think that we can take the questions.
Yep.
We can marry up the artifacts, line them up. I do agree, Rob, that this is something we can give to the superintendent to fill out, right? And maybe that's the brilliance of this. When we give the superintendent these questions, it also gives the superintendent the ability to expand, right? To really expand on how they feel they've done. So maybe there is, I think there is a way to do that. And what I'm hearing from everybody is that's what they would prefer. Okay. Is that right?
Yeah, and one more thing I was going to jump in and then turn it over to Rob was, you reminded me, one of the things I liked with where Rob had headed with his questions, it feels closer to something that the future boards can edit as they need. It's not so pernicious and difficult. It's just simple and clean. And they say, wow, we're missing this, add number 6, or edit the language. Right? It feels much simpler to me to clean up and edit. And I'm not saying the Oregon one couldn't. I think this edited version will probably get us there. But I just think that thinking forward like that, making the next revision easier, or the living document aspect of it easier, would be really nice. Sorry, Rob, go right ahead.
So, Rob, before you do that, so do you have, I like all those questions. Is everybody okay with those questions? And then is there anybody else that would like to add anything in there?
I think we give you some flexibility with the questions and what you had to do editing, so.
So yeah, I'm game for seeing how to marry that stuff, so I'll look for what you guys come up with next in that regard. One broader question that I want to ask, and I don't really know the answer to it, so I'm really just throwing it out there. And that is this rating scale business, right? One of the challenges one of the things that we thought anyway was good about the Washington thing is it tried to describe what was meant by 1, 2, they didn't use 1, 2, 3, 4. They used basic, proficient, not good, and terrific. I forget the exact words, but the point is that there were descriptors in each box that said what that looked like. Now, those descriptors didn't always have meaning to us in our context, so that was definitely a problem. But they tried to give some idea, right? And so I don't know what to do necessarily with the 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Because without any description at all, it's really, how do we interpret 2, for example? Is that like below average? Is that what that means? Or improvement needed? 1 is like things are really in the tank and you got a serious, I don't know, what does any of that mean, I guess is. We could, so maybe that's something that needs to be thought about.
We'll never agree on this stuff.
Exactly.
So
I don't
never
know.
agree.
And in the end, it's still going to be a judgment, even whatever we put onto those descriptors, right? As we saw as we worked through previous evaluations, it's always a judgment call, subjective, as we get back to the other language about whether something is proficient or it isn't proficient, for example. But that's just the challenge. We have 7 of us doing this job of evaluating one person.
Okay, so in the whole workbook that we would put together, it does list that it would say 4 is accomplished, 3 is effective, 2 is developing, 1 is inefficient. But one of the things that we have talked about a few times, and we talked about it with Dwayne, which was great to have his insight a little bit on that too, is we don't like the idea of trying to average the numbers and we lose the fact that we have a 2 sitting out there. And so we talked about doing the range aspect of you got in here to start that a conversation and go into it. One of the things, and I'll talk about it with the Oregon one because I already visualized that one. But if we handed that to all 7 of us, and all 7 of us rated, and then also had our comments, one of the things that I had talked to Autumn too was about how can we share all that data with the superintendent as this is our feedback, but it's not our summary. It's not our public summary, so that they can see the different views that we might have. And we were discussing, how that comes into being, shareable and not. So, things like that, I think it's important that we don't lose our individual voices, but we also still have one voice as a board in there. And how do we share those so that they get an idea of what their opinion is throughout the district or throughout the board. Yeah. So.
Go ahead, Naomi.
I like the idea of a range. I dislike anything that we would do with averaging because that's not helpful, as we know from standards-based grading. And I don't think that the artifacts, I'm not exactly sure that we need to pair up the list of artifacts because this is not an exhaustive list.
No.
And there is a lot of opportunity for the superintendent to read the question and say, here's how I'm meeting that. It might be helpful to have a couple of possible examples of artifacts, but I don't think that we need to try and match up the 2 pieces exactly. I think it's more conceptually that we like it. And as we're doing this range, I think it would be very easy to have 2 areas to that. One that says that here are the areas of celebration, and then another that says here are the areas of improvement, because we should have something that the superintendent can improve on in every category. I'm pretty sure that we're not hiring a demigod, so we want that constant improvement. And I think that if we are intentional in that, then we will get that year after year.
I agree with the artifacts. I'm going through in my head with this talk right now, and I mean, there's a couple here and there that we could put together easily with it. I do think it is helpful a little bit. I actually even pulled the one from, there's a Michigan one that even has a bigger list and it's kind of it's almost a good list for people coming onto a board to look, just kind of be able to glance through that, oh, there's that kind of data, or there's that kind of information out there that I could look at to get a picture of part of the district. So, yeah, I kind of think that even if it's still an appendix in there, it still might be helpful just to have that as something to ring a bell in everyone's head that, oh, how could I, and then you can choose, maybe if it goes into one of the 5 questions or 6 questions down the road. I still think that might be helpful to have out there.
I preferred the word examples to artifacts anyway.
Yeah.
The tone of artifact is slightly strange to me, but better. So I like what you guys were talking about. So go ahead, Carolyn.
So I was just wondering if our acting superintendent, Dr. Lambert, would weigh in, and I think that your voice is really important here. You've been here a long time. You've kind of seen what we've been doing, and then you're a superintendent moving to a new district, and so I'd just like to hear from you a little bit about your impressions and your experience, even where you're going.
Do you want me to speak to the evaluation you're proposing, or just the process in general, Carol?
Both, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I think you're on the right track on the evaluation. I've been fortunate enough to be in the meetings with you and DJ and Dwayne and Autumn, and those have been really eye-opening. I think the changes that you're making as far as the interactions are good, specifically something Naomi said, right? You want to create a situation where the person can grow. They can learn along the way. They can get feedback, process it. You're in many respects, as the 7 of you, you're the eyes and ears in the community for the system in many ways. And so I think that feedback is really strong. I really believe the way you're getting that set up is positive. Speaking in general, I think you've broken away a little bit from that traditional evaluation model that's just that one point in time, you talk about it and forget about it. I don't think that's ever been your intent. One of the things I like where you're going, and I like this in other districts, you're looking at it as a continuum, right? You got this set up and you check points and you move forward. You have checkpoints and you move forward. I think those are really strong ways for a superintendent not to let a long period of time go by without good feedback, or if you don't have something formal and they move down the line and they don't know it and they go 4 months into it, you've got 4 months of stuff to kind of regroup and pull it back and try to fix it. If you see something right away and that person has that opportunity for more of a formative feedback where they can act on it, and that seems to be a real priority in the model you have. So that stands out for me. I really like that. I also like the opportunity to, I know we haven't talked about it too much tonight, but one of the features was as you look at accountability measures in the system, right? We talked about gaps, we talk about performance, growth. Some of those key measures that you've popped around, I think we had about 5 to 7 of them, if I remember correctly, the last time we were together. Being able to pull those into a dashboard type thing, and I know we've talked about that, allows the superintendent to engage with you with that data in front of them and talk about it and keep it ongoing. That's a feature I've never really seen before in a superintendent evaluation, not that sophisticated. I really encourage you, as you look at those key measures, put those in. We already have a great format for that work that Dwayne has set up in Power BI, and all these data that we're talking about are already accessible to us. We're not creating new things. Get those together, and I would, again, strongly encourage you to keep having those quarterly type points where to say, how are things going? Let the superintendent have the opportunity to show that. That's data that they want to have. I think that's really important. I know a lot of you believe in that, so I'd keep on the right track on that one. I think superintendent evaluations are evolving, and I think as we come through COVID, we're learning a lot about leadership at our levels and what we value. That work has changed our perspectives. When we came in here and talked about our work, we predominantly looked at academic performance, business, finance, those type of things. But now we're really starting to look more, I think, holistic. at the system. And one of the things that's standing out right here by getting feedback from community, getting feedback from others, and not just one type of group, and looking at that, I think is just going to make for a more robust evaluation that you're going to feel better about. So I really think you're on the right track. I'm not sure if that's what you're asking for, but I've been encouraged by just watching the work. I thought the last meeting we had was a real breakthrough. The key measures piece and some of the other stuff. So yeah, I think you're right where you need to be. As I look at other superintendent evaluations that I've participated or been privy to or going to participate in, I think those features I'm pointing stand out a little bit for you.
I'll give you guys a little taste because we didn't go into the data part tonight, but he's talking that Dwayne came up with 6 keystone measures and targets.
There you go, keystone. That's
is what he talked from the. It's from the summary list that we have on our DE1 report, and so there were 4 of those that are measured 3 times a year. And so when we do our quarterly check-ins, it gives us an opportunity to have the superintendent give us a conversation about those and present what's happening and talk about it, especially with making a dashboard that we could easily then see the data and the ways that it moves. So that was something that's really exciting. I think that will help the conversation go. Also, Dwayne did get us our community partnership questionnaire to us last night. So we do have a draft of that to share out, and maybe after we get through this week of busyness, we can dive into that together.
Could you, where do we see this keystone measures?
It's on.
Oh, it's not in the, okay, I was.
I don't, no, I didn't. It was, it's on my timeline sheet now, but it wasn't on the one that got sent.
Oh, okay.
So.
All right, I'm starting to understand because this got passed around and it's
Yep.
not in the data you presented.
Yeah, not yet.
Okay.
So that one just has the highlighted versions of which ones they are.
Okay, and then Rob has a question.
Yeah, no, I think we've got, I hope we've got good directional guidance here. I think the challenge is the second thing you asked about, Christoph, which is how to land this, and particularly how to land it in a timely fashion, right? Because the reality is here that, well, at least the way we've been doing it to date, right, the superintendent evaluation process / instrument has been part of the superintendent's contract, right? Mm-hmm. And if we're on track and lucky, by mid-April, we're going to have a new superintendent for next year and presumably a contract with that person, or at least be working on a contract. So somehow we need to get from here to there in a really concrete form, and I'm just wondering whether you guys are.
Yeah, I thought the way that I read the contract, it just had to have the dates of when we were doing it, not necessarily the actual stuff. Is that right?
In the past, sorry, it's really loud. Normally it did have it did have them attached to the contract.
They did? Okay.
But I think we've also said that it can be a bit of a work in progress that we can amend or whatnot. Because I think, to Rob's point, we should try to land this with some reasonable urgency, but at the same time, the work you guys are doing is just too awesome. So I would recommend we maybe get a next reading at the next meeting, but not necessarily have to settle it quite yet, if that's still suitable. So.
Sure. Sounds good.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? Go ahead, Carolyn.
So I would just like to thank Rob for writing those questions. You know, when we got the document from Weld County, we kind of talked about that, but we wondered if that was going to be too loose and not have the things that we wanted. And I'm just really glad for the group work here, you know, for Rob sending the stuff out and for Naomi's input and everybody else chipping in on this. And I think we're heading in a good direction now. I agree with Todd that these check-ins, these regular check-ins and these key measures are going to be much better for us than what we were doing.
Yeah.
And thank you also for the work you guys are putting into to bring this to fruition, because it's been a lot of work. I know you've done a lot of research, and it's going to be more work to get it in a nice package. So thank you in advance for that, I guess, too.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. And what a great meeting, really talking about the board superintendent relationship, and then again, the board superintendent relationship through the evaluation tool. Really interesting stuff. So if there are no other comments for this evening, I'm just going to say I think we have 3 weeks between now and the next meeting, and it's going to be a very exciting 3 weeks. A lot's going to happen between now and then, so stay tuned. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting at 8:49 p.m. A full 13 minutes off from when Jill predicted. So.
8:37.
Oh.
That was good. That's work.